Hello,
It's time.
everybody. I want to be able to see everyone in the box. If everybody's come in, say hi and where you are. There's our friend Yocheved. We need to give Yocheved a shout out. She was first in the room, not surprising. She's our shadchan tonight. There's everybody, just in case you weren't nervous. Wow, there's a lot of people here. Hello, everybody. I'm not sure if we're allowed to read the names. It's supposed to be anonymous, Ellie? What are the rules tonight?
I don't think this one's definitely not anonymous.
Okay, so there's a lot of people from around the world. Wow, Portugal, Chicago, Berlin, Tel Aviv, Johannesburg, India, Brooklyn. It's going way too fast. I can't read all those names.
All right.
Fine.
So
Okay,
I
hundreds of
figured
people
I'd give
here.
a little background on how we met, because I'm a strong believer in the steps. There's the second step starts come to believe, right? That we come to believe, and the expression "come to believe" is a curious expression. So come to believe almost means that the belief has to come from experience. It's not from reading in a book. It's not from someone else's experience. There's come to believe. So I've come to believe in the power of providence, divine providence, that things happen in a certain way for a reason. And I think that the people who choose to look at the world in that way find it, and the people who don't find it also. It just comes across random. So what happened is I've heard your name a number of times, Rav Katz, but I've never actually spent time on listening to a full share of yours. And a few weeks ago, it was before the quarantine, so it was, we need BQ. Right?
That's right, before quarantine,
so it was maybe like a month before quarantine, because I know I was in Tennessee with my family on vacation, and on my wife's family's WhatsApp chat, someone put a SoundCloud of a share of yours, which was, why do the same bad things keep happening to me?
Mm-hmm.
And I listened to it. I think it was about an hour and a half class, and I listened to it, and I was very impressed. I was moved especially by you bringing in your own experience into it. I remember the story of going to daven at 1 a.m. and some guy showing up in the middle of the forest telling you, what are you doing in my place?
Stole his place in the forest. You shouldn't steal a Yid's place in the forest. It's not a very nice thing to do. Right. Apparently,
right.
That's what he did. Apparently, he owned the forest. How was I to know?
Right. And then you connected it to your own personal sense of not belonging in different areas. And then once I heard that, the rest of the stuff was a lot easier to listen to. Right. Meaning it opened the path for the rest of this year, and it was very enlightening and very interesting. So I reached out to Yocheved Saidoff, who I know has a lot of respect for you and your work. And I mentioned that, wow, that share was amazing. That share was amazing. He said, I'll put you guys in touch. So we spoke, and after we spoke for about an hour, and after that, I felt this urge inside me to write something up on the 12 steps, because I shared a little bit about my own experience, and what I gathered from the call is that you have run into a couple people over the last few years who have experience with the 12 steps, but there wasn't maybe a consistency to it, and I felt like I needed to write something on it. So I wrote a 4 or 5 page synopsis of my own experience. And I should qualify that from the beginning that I'm not an expert on the 12 steps. I haven't studied it and compared the way different people read it, and compared it against exactly what was available before at the time, the way an expert researcher may go about it and look at all the stories. Simply my own experience, the way it was handed down to me through the process. So one thing I'll avoid saying on this call, for those who are sensitive to the anonymity factor, is we can talk about the 12 steps, but we won't speak about any specific group. There are many different 12-step groups. There's Alcoholics Anonymous is the most famous one. I'm not part of that group. I don't speak on behalf of the 12 steps. I speak simply from my own experience, and that's the same thing that I wrote up to Rav Katz, and just my different experience with it. And it was clear to me that Rav Katz was sensitive to the prayer and meditation aspect of religion, and that practice is there. And I sensed that he saw that not everyone he met in the 12 steps has that same practice necessarily. So I figured that if I can put something in front of him, it can at least give him a more well-rounded view of the 12 steps, in case he encounters the need for it, or someone encounters the need to ask his advice. And Rav Katz suggested that maybe a follow-up conversation would be recorded. So right now, you guys have invited into a follow-up conversation between
you are of our best friends. Okay, invited too. Great. So where are we starting today, Ellie?
So I guess what intrigued you about what I sent to you that said, hey, maybe a further conversation is warranted, and where are you in your own understanding of the 12 steps prior to anything to do with the communication with me? And I'm sure you've researched a little bit in preparation for this.
Sure. Well, my introduction to this world, I've never been through these kind of challenges and degrees of dark days myself. I had my own spiritual awakening, and I was not born religious. I'm not sure I'm religious today, maybe on a good day, depending how you define the term. But I definitely had a deep spiritual awakening. I was a part of, growing up. I didn't know anything about my own tradition. I was into all the good places that a young Jewish boy goes to search for spirituality, if it was Buddhism or Sufism or Hinduism or, I don't know, socialism, feminism, all the isms, right? And I had, it's not really a nice discussion, but I had very profound supernatural experiences in a very intense way over a year, which, it led me to Jerusalem. And without going into my own story, that's not really the subject tonight, but needless to say, I learned in all, the main yeshivas here in Jerusalem and grew in Torah and mitzvahs. And I also then had my, let's say, disenchanted period where I kind of felt I'd come closer to all these details, but I still didn't know Hashem. Or I knew Hashem, but at least not the time I was in yeshiva. I don't think I'm the first or the last person to experience that. So for many years of teaching, I started teaching more and more Kabbalah and Chassidus. But the tachlis to me, which is the essence of Kabbalah, and particularly Chassidus, is that these things aren't supposed to be theoretical, and they're certainly not supposed to be dogmatic. We're supposed to be experiencing the supernatural through the mitzvahs. And that's the definition of what the mitzvahs really are, is to lift us up into a supernatural reality of a transformative experience. It's supposed to make us emotionally healthier and live supernatural elevated lives, literally. I mean, that's all the way through Chassidus and Kabbalah. And when you understand that frame of reference, it's all the way through the Torah. I founded a few years ago a project called the Elevation Project. And I'm only saying now, not to promote, but just to give a little context of how I initially got into the 12 steps. I mean, never having gone through these challenges in my life, you hear about the 12 steps, but they don't interest you. And, it's something interesting out there that, people, messed up people going through. I don't know who they are. I'm not saying we are, it's the outside view. When I founded the Elevation Project, the goal was to mainstream and bring back to the forefront of Jewish practice, emotional, transformational teachings, meditation, high-level supernatural experiences. That's why I was first drawn towards Torah, because I'm interested in those things. And the more I learned, the more further I got away from them. And the goal was, could we bring them back? How would being able to take a group of people in a room and give them transformational spiritual experiences, how would that affect outreach? How would that affect inreach? How would that affect religious life in the Orthodox? Aren't we supposed to be a light into the nations and share that with the whole of the world? And that's what we've been into. And within that, there is a lot of deep themes about that Torah has to be much broader in its reach in the world, that we have to be much more emotionally healthy and more spiritually developed to attain these heights, and creating, a very complex and beautiful, rich curriculums to teach people advanced meditation and emotional transformation. Now you see, I'm edging towards the subject a little further and further. What really got me interested in 12 steps was part of the model of the curriculum I was and am developing for Elevation. We're already teaching this to thousands of people in the world, but is we needed to set up a Chabura model. So Chabura is the idea, which is all the way through Chassidus and all the way through in Kabbalah and for sure in Musa, is that people got together, and the old wise men of Jerusalem, even 100 of years ago and 50 years ago, they used to have Chaburas every single day. And I jokingly say they were. What's that?
Chabura means what?
A Chabura means a group of people that get together every day to work through their emotional stuffs, to work on themselves, to confess their sins to each other. This is all the way in Musa and Kabbalah. There's a tzaddik in Jerusalem called Tzvi Meir Zilberberg, and he runs these, and he has all these traditions that he teaches them. So they would get together every single day, even that they know that the greatest rabbis in small groups, sometimes 4, 5, 6, they would share their challenges. They would all work on certain breakthroughs at a certain time. They would pray together. I was taught if a person goes in the mikveh every day, then you go in the mikveh and you pray for each other person when you're in the mikveh. They would confess to other their challenges. I even heard there's a story about a group of them that one of their daughters was getting married one time, but they were so committed to meeting every single day. And I'm bringing this up because I get that it's relevance, is that even between the time when the chuppah ended and they all went to eat, they all had their daily meeting and were together, right? So I was very, very interested, as I am now, of realizing that if we're going to teach a transformative methodology based on Hasidus and Kabbalah, to teach people to have a supernatural experience, to teach people to understand not religion as a dogma, but as you said, as a direct divine experience and connection, then one of the things we needed to do was create a model, which was more than just a teacher teaching the students, but the students were empowered to work together and transform each other and take those transformational teachings. And when I was speaking about that to people, you'd be shocked, Ellie, that people brought up something called Alcoholics Anonymous. So that's when I started going, oh yeah, that's probably the most successful Chabura model in all of history. And there was fascinating things about it for me educationally, meaning there isn't management. So these people manage to do it themselves, right? They're not necessarily trained or spectacular leaders. That's not the charisma that's holding together. So that's when I started to look into what was going on here. And I found out some very, very fascinating things, but I never went I didn't break down the 12 steps. And I always knew, like I like to do, I'm an integrator by nature. So I always knew, one day I'm sure there's something deep in the 12 steps and I want to look into them, but I was looking at the model begadol in a general sense.
Right.
I found some
it's turned
interesting...
into probably over 100,000 groups. If you take all different 12-step groups, are probably over 100,000 groups around the world.
You mean currently in the world?
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah, I've heard it's like tens of millions of people. I mean, it's something where you'd have to say from a Torah perspective, from a Kabbalistic perspective, that there's something supernatural happening at the core of that to allow it to have such continuum without management, without force, right? And the bottom level of that is people need it because of the darkness individuals confront in the world. But the fact that it's stayed together and been so successful over the years, again, it's not perfect, as we know and as research says, but there is something profound there, and so many people have been benefited. There's a blessing in there, and that was kind of what was interesting me about it in the research that I did. When you sent me that letter, I got distracted on that subject, but I'd uncovered some interesting things in the research, which were my kind of chush, my sense of what was going on in it. But that was the first time I literally looked at the 12 steps in detail. Until then, I was like, well, it's a model, and I'm interested in the model. And when I look at all these things, my nature is, what Kabbalistic models could we see hidden in there? And what I looked at there was no Kabbalistic model to find. It was literally the halacha of triggering the spiritual experience. It was literally the halachas. You don't even have to go to Kabbalah and Chassidus, but it was literally like a textbook Rabbi Nachman, a textbook Baal Tanya, a textbook Baal Shem Tov, Chabura, designed to trigger and sustain supernatural experiences. And then I was like, when I was looking over what you're saying, I was like, wow, this is crazy. And that's when I further did some research to say, where did they get this from? And that's when a lot of kind of lights went on.
Interesting. One of the things you said, I don't want to segue too far into that, but it was interesting to me. You said that after you had a really spiritual experience in Israel, that the more you learned, the further away you got from that initial spiritual experience. Did I catch that correctly?
I had the original spiritual experiences in different orders in different places, but yes, I would say that it's safe to say that the yeshiva experience for me ended up being the opposite of what I thought I came to Israel for.
Do you have a sense for why that happens?
Yeah. Do you want to go into that now?
Maybe a little bit. I'm curious, just from my own experience, because I've felt that to some degree. That I grew up in it. I grew up in Crown Heights, in the thick of Kansiva Hashem Sabracha, right in the middle of the massive amounts of light. And I left disenchanted and frustrated, and not a believer in God, and not a believer in spirituality, Judaism, religion, any of that. And really the 12 steps and recovery from addiction is what brought me back to it, and what's allowed me to reapproach Judaism and reapproach God in a new way. So I'm wondering, was that my own experience? It sounds like
I think that's not your own experience. Number one, I think that. I think that it's exactly what the Baal Shem Tov first stood up preaching about. It's what Yisrael Salanta equally discussed. I think you were brought up in a Hasidic community, as far as I know. I believe, I'm glad we're not saying this publicly and it's just you and me talking to each other, but I believe that if the Baal Shem Tov would see Hasidus today, he would say that's basically the complete opposite of what I started the movement to be. And I think there's a very deep connection between what I call primal Hasidus, the Hasidus that the Baal Shem Tov and the first two generations after him founded, and what came today, compared to what our AA is, or the 12-step program is. And if you understand the history of the 12-step program, like the kind of hidden history of what they were drawing on to create it, they were also along that same path where they were rebelling against, if you look about the Oxford group, they were rebelling against dogmatic Christian theology and trying to explore the direct spiritual divine connection as a healing mechanism through the New Thought movement, which is the version 100 something years ago of the New Age movement. They quoted from the equivalent Lahavdil Elef Havdalah, Emanuel Swedenborgen, if that's his name, who was very much into, if you read some of his writings from early Christianity, as far as I know, in the 1600s, some of those things sound literally like Hasidus, with that calling. And I think I can go into hours and hours of discussion, which is a little off the subject, but in some ways it isn't, that Kabbalistically and historically, we are in a long exile, which means we're dogmatically following the rules, but we're further and further away from the direct revelation, direct experience of the rules. I had a friend that also was born religious and left the path and started re-engaging in Hasidus in a very deep way and came back. And I said to him, we were talking one time, like what brought him back? And he said to me, it's a parable, like someone bought him a computer, and he was typing away at the computer for a whole year and using it. It was very exciting, and he was using, he'd have it around with him, it'd open up every day and work on it. And after a year, he suddenly looked down, he saw this cord, and he said, what's this cord? And he plugged into the wall, and suddenly the computer turned on, right? So he said, there's this thing all along, but I was using an external way, but I never knew the light on the inside. I have a little daughter, 2-year-old, and she dressed up for Purim as a mummy. And she walked around the house. She had a cell phone, but it wasn't on. And she walked around for the whole day just going, no. She can't even speak. But she was mimicking what she saw her mother do. But there was no voice coming in. She wasn't talking to anyone. So I kind of feel what has happened historically after many years of exile and Jews being in a fight and flight mode from so many challenges is we're left miraculously, beautifully maintaining the details of the law, but we've lost the Dveikus, we've lost the divine revelation, the energy, the magic, the supernatural connection. And therefore we've lost the emotional transformation it's supposed to cause, right? It's supposed to create deeply healthy, deeply connected, deeply alive human beings. I don't think either of us could say honestly it does that. Again, I have many beautiful religious people that I know and I love. I'm not speaking us versus them, but there's definitely a pattern to say that. When I hear stories of holy Jews like your own, I totally think, and I'm not saying this to be charming, if I was brought up religious, I probably wouldn't be religious at all today either. I'd had very profound supernatural experiences that led me on a spiritual path. And I was drawn to Hasidus and Kabbalah to become religious because they were speaking directly about the experiences that I experienced. And from that, I had to learn. I'm glad I spent time in yeshiva. I'm glad I learned Aramaic. I'm glad I learned Hebrew. Glad I learned to think with the lucid clarity of the Talmud and its logic system. I'm glad I learned the halakha because it allowed me to go deeper into these things. But what I felt, it was a body without a soul. And that's what the Hasidic master said, that it would be, and it was becoming. And until we needed to re-plug in.
What you're saying is that what the Baal Shem Tov almost revolted against, he would do that again now if he saw.
Yes, I mean, it's worse now. Again, it's just you and me talking, so no one's going to be offended. It's worse now because Hasidus was supposed to be the solution, and sometimes today Hasidus is the problem. I'm not saying more than the Livish world. Each world has its challenge. But when you're teaching the Torahs of the solution, but today we learn Hasidus intellectually. Today Hasidus can be also dogma and more chumras, right? And even the most beautiful Torah, which is brilliant and genius and lights up my soul, it doesn't, just because you learn those Torahs about tefillah and the gematria is about tefillah, it doesn't mean you know how to pray in a way that you're doing his pashtus agashmis with the Dveikus. So I believe, and this is really on subject, I believe that, we've run these seminars now all around the world and taught thousands of people how to achieve Dveikus. And I still hear from people, what do you mean? That's something for Tzaddikim, it's not us. And I believe with all my heart that addicts on a very, fall into the bottom level, who suddenly get brought upwards and healed through these kind of programs. I believe both their addiction Their addiction is a form of seeking escape through higher connection, ironically. And the healing comes by giving them that true, actual supernatural connection. And I believe it's ironic that a soul like yours, brought up in a Hasidic world, has to find divinity in there. The way you find divinity is actually the instructions that the Baal Shem Tov gave. It is the instructions that the Baal Shem Tov, that the Rebbe Nachman gave. And I believe if we could turn on that supernatural connection and teach children, I teach it to my children, teach it to your children, how to have divine connection, that we don't have to fall so low to connect so high.
What struck me most about watching some of your classes, now that I've probably watched about 6 or 7 of them and each one about 2 hours long, the way you talk about like very esoteric concepts, right? The different levels of godliness and how it comes out and contracted, and it's like your head wants to explode from it. But then very quickly, you're speaking to someone one-on-one about their personal experience, their struggles as a parent, their struggles as with trauma, with health, and bringing it in a very practical way, right? That's what I saw the most, like taking it all the way up and also very, very, very practical.
The higher the teaching, the lower it must go. The higher the teaching, the highest light of Hashem is able to penetrate into the greatest darkness. You know, that's why it even says in Kabbalah Chassidus, you know, people in the darkness, what's called that, you know, the darkest forces are trapped. They need the highest teaching, the highest light to go in. So for me, that's part of the magic, is to understand the deepest ideas, to have the deepest experiences, and then help people in the darkest places with that. As far as I'm concerned, if the Torah doesn't go that low to help the souls in the darkest places, then I don't know if it's real Torah. I don't know if it's high as we think it is. Torah is supposed to be helpful. Kabbalah is supposed to be helpful. It's supposed to raise us up. It's supposed to transform us. And if not, I don't know what we're doing. When you learn the supernatural powers that Chazal, the Talmud says about someone that learns Torah, they're protected, you know, they're spiritually healed, all these kind of things, we don't see that. And I think because we're not learning how to do it with a higher power, with a higher power within us. You know, that word higher power really unlocks a lot of things, even for religious Jews, because we're so used to thinking God and Hashem that we kind of end up thinking about it in a very external way. But a higher power is like something which, again, is a more experiential language, and it's something I need to let in. It's something I have different assumptions about it. And I think it opens up doorways for people, windows for people, and possibilities for people.
So one thing that's coming up for me as you're talking is hearing, I don't know how long ago it was, but it was before I got into program and before I had even admitted to myself that I was an addict. See, I speak openly and publicly about a porn addiction and a sex addiction. And one of the nice things about that addiction versus others is you don't reek of alcohol. Your eyes don't look necessarily bloodshot from, you can look bloodshot from the computer screen, but they won't look bloodshot from drugs or things like that. It's a little bit easier to hide that there's an addiction present versus other things. Like for me, I specifically didn't like to get drunk. I didn't like the sense of losing control. So it was very difficult for me to acknowledge that I had an addiction at any point. But prior to any of this, I had seen a conversation with Rabbi Twersky. So Rabbi Abraham Twersky was one of the first to speak openly about the steps, about recovery, and most meetings are in church basements. That's the fact of, you know, where the community center that's most likely to give a room for free to people is a church. And people went to him and said, is it okay? You're telling people to go to the 12 steps. They're walking into a church. And is it okay for a Jewish person to walk into a church? And Rabbi Twersky said, yes, because of life and death. And one of the things I asked him was like, but we have everything. We have the Chassidus, we have the Musar, we have the Kabbalah, we have everything available to us. So he said, if you find me a room full of people, if you find me rooms of people who are reading those books like their life depends on it, I will send them there. But in the meantime, the only place I have is to the 12-step groups. And it sounds like the same thing you're saying with that Chabura model and the Elevation Project is to have people who are willing to openly openly talk in those ways about our deepest, most personal struggles.
I think that's true. I think there's a wave of emotional intelligence and awakening and desire for spiritual connection happening within the religious world. I think the Baal Tshuva movement, the newly religious friends who are part of that world, including myself, including, you know, people out there, I think they're causing an awakening like that. They're causing, they want to be able to talk openly about emotions. They want more level of integration. They're more demanding of spiritual experience, that prayer be meaningful, that groups connect in a more meaningful way. I think there's tremendous change happening. And I think that all of it is fulfilling the pasuk that is already said in Tanakh, that the days will come when people are hungry and they're thirsty, not for bread and water, but it's what's the Davar Hashem, the word of God. But the word
Where
Davar,
does it say this?
It's in Tanakh. I can show it. It's a famous prophecy about the end of days.
Right.
And the line Davar Hashem means the word of God, but the word Davar actually means an object, something tangible of divinity. And I think that, people who hit rock bottom, they have no choice but to turn to spirituality. And some still begrudgingly. It's not like a simple solution for many, right? There's many people who, take up the 12-step program and still try and secularize it and still try and base it. Many scientists do research and said it's really about the group bonding. It's really about the trust that they build. But the founders of AA, they held it was all, the essence was to trigger the spiritual experience. So I think that there are many people seeking the kind of direct spiritual experience, if it's for their healing, if it's just for their own sense of transcendence. And I think that's happening more and more in the religious world. And part of that, there is more and more acknowledgement of addiction within the religious world. I don't need to tell you that. I think that people are more confident into that. I think there's more acknowledgement today more than ever that, marriage in the religious world, or raising up children who are not leaving the path because they're not happy. So Hashem always gives us an option to grow in two ways, through positive or through challenge. And I think the religious world has a lot of positive, but is facing a lot of challenge, which is causing some inner reflection. And I feel on a good day, I feel quite hopeful that, more and more of those meetings will be possible, and more of those people will be possible. When we started teaching elevation a few years ago, it was already foreign. And more people are coming to our programs, and you see that people are going, is it possible? I spoke a couple of years for, a good friend. He has a program like this, and he works with a lot of people. And it was already fascinating to see people in that program listening to meditation. What is meditation? What's the possibility of meditation? People you would not expect to be open. People that maybe were brought up in Hasidic or Litvish communities, ultra-Orthodox, never would have thought that is possible. But now they're hungry for that. So I see and I believe that there's awakening coming in very positive ways. And I hope they don't always have to be triggered by falling into the darkness. But,
by hitting the bottom.
By hitting the rock bottom, right? But that also can bring people to very high places.
There's a concept of an addict. That word, however we define it, because we can spend 2 hours just on that term. But in general, the way we understand an addict, someone who's addicted to alcohol, someone who's addicted to drugs, is that concept addressed in Kabbalah or Chassidus in any way? Like someone who just takes it just a little bit further than...
So there are examples that the Gemara brings, like a Ben Sora or Moira, of people that are particularly, let's say, have a destructive personality or destructive behavior and certain consequence to them. The word addict, the word addict itself comes, as far as I know, comes from the Latin word addictus. And addictus has this kind of duality where it kind of means, in one sense, devotion and dedication and sacrifice to something. But in the flip side, it's something which is more about, betraying and abandoning. So it's a kind of an idea of something that you're devoted to, which is, for lack of a better word, sabotaging your life. Mm-hmm. Now, in a Kabbalistic model, you see, I think there's a reason. There's something called clippers that we all have, and something called the clipper kasha, which is a very strong clipper, a very strong block. In the Kabbalistic model, I think it's extremely important that, I kind of think when I learn these Kabbalistic teachings and I see what people are dealing with in 12-step programs, and I have great respect for science, and I love the kind of mirror, as the Zohar talks about, the kind of bridge between science and Kabbalah. There's such revelation, such gifts there. But sometimes I see things in science which I think are particularly dangerous or damaging. Like, for example, calling addiction a disease. And I'm answering your question by saying this. I believe the Torah would say it's absolutely not true. And you should never call it as such. The new kind of, in the last kind of decades, the statement that people who have, certain genetic predisposition to addiction, I think that itself can create a kind of illusion, which is also highly destructive Highly destructive means it demoralizes someone.
So you're saying two different things. I just want to parse it. One is
Yeah.
calling it a disease, and one is the genetic. Right? Because I say for
So
myself,
we're exploring.
I have not found it in my own experience, myself and others, for it to be genetic, right? Unless we say that there's family dysfunction that could be passed down from one to the next. So in as much as dysfunction is created, but I've never heard anyone say.
Well, the statement is there's literature you can read on this in the world of science that discusses research in the areas. Genetic meaning that why do some people respond to drugs with extra vulnerability, right? Extra susceptibility to forming addiction where other people may take the same drug and not. I'm not saying this is the answer, by the way. I'm saying these are part of the hypotheses of the science.
But I don't know if that's the same as a disease model. The disease model
so it's
is
not
saying
a disease
that,
model. And another disease model says that, the addiction which develops in the mind is so destructive that it destroys, chemically speaking, in the brain, it destroys it to the point where the recovery is not possible, so to speak. Now, all I'm adding is, what addiction is? What is the point of addiction, right? What is the point of addiction? We saw some people asking questions when they signed it up. And person was saying, do I just have bad habits? Am I addicted? Where do I cross that line? So all of this is my way of setting up from as I understand. And I'm not here speaking as an expert. I'm not an expert in this field. I'm certainly not expert in addiction or the 12-step. We're just having a dialogue together. I wouldn't even say I'm an expert in Kabbalah Chassidus, but we're talking out from my learning, your learning, we're sharing together all together. It's very, very simple. There are different stratas of human consciousness, okay? They're called Asiya, Yetzira, Bria, Atzilus, and above Atzilus. And represented, some of you are into the Kabbalistic terminology. Some of people just want to know, how do we save ourselves? But there's the most basic level, Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Chai, Yechida. There's the physical, there is the emotional, there is the intellectual, and there's the spiritual, and there's the root soul, okay? Now, those levels are the full dimensions of human consciousness. And that's what's possible. So I believe that from a Torah perspective, there's something called habituation, hegel, right? And we become habituated, okay? Hegel nasa teva sheni, that the more we become habituated to something, this is just the Talmud now, right? It becomes our second nature and defines us. And in each of those levels, we have our own capacity to fall in body. That means I eat things that are bad and I get used to lying in bed, right? I get used to those kind of things. And there's emotional levels. I emotionally program myself. I want pleasure. I can associate pleasure with a destructive means. I can associate pleasure with elevated means, right? I have certain beliefs about reality. Some of those beliefs are true. Some of those beliefs are not true. Productive, unproductive, destructive, fine. I have spiritual energy around me. And this is a less understood element, but the more my body, my heart, and my mind are connected to spiritually productive things, the more I draw, and we're talking Kabbalistic now, spiritual abundance of energy, of light, of connection, of love, of blessing, which, according to our sages, actually generates providence and things happening in our life, right, of positive energy, of positive opportunity. If you will, this is called the Koach HaMoshech, or also known today as the law of attraction. And if I pursue negative, destructive, fragmenting, disconnecting things, and I become obsessed with them and aligned in a negative way, then I track myself what's called shadim, which is negative energies, destructive opportunities. I bring that more and more to my life. So from a strict Torah perspective, Kabbalistic, Hasidic, however you want to call it, addiction is, I believe, is as simple as if I get my body and the chemicals of the body and the neurology, right, the chemicals and the hormones addicted in a certain way. So there are many people that can try alcohol and they have fun with it, and then they go back to their life. They can try heroin, smack, pornography, they have fun with it, and they move back to their life. It doesn't mean it's good. It just means it is what it is. But then they have certain emotional things. They suffer from fear, from pain, from anxiety. And they start to say, my way of overcoming that, they've been through trauma in their life, is that I want to feel the pleasure, the buzz, the release, the control, whatever emotional thing they're getting from that. And then they rationalize it and justify that, right? This is the only way I can be myself. Really, it's not overcoming me, etc. So what they're doing is they're creating what's called a klippa, a negative expression, a destructive expression of body patterning, a destructive emotional expression, a destructive mental belief system about it. And then you get into what's called free fall, which means the more you do that, the more you hardwire that, the more you go over there, then all those things are getting darker and darker, more immersed in that. And they're binding together to become a klipa kasha, which means a extremely hardwired approach, right? Level which they're falling to. At that moment, what they can do is something called the moichenis mistalik, which means the energy and blessing we have in our divine soul, which is the light that illuminates every single one of us in that religious conversion moment, and I see the light moment. That's what happened to, Bill when he founded Alcoholics Anonymous, when he was, taking the belladonna treatment, and he said, I'm giving myself up, and if Hashem, you're there, God, if you're there, answer me. And that's what every single one of them have had. And what he was able to do was shift out of the negative spiritual energy around him, which was depleting him even more, and bring down a divine revelation. So from the people I deal with, one of the things I can speak from is I've dealt with thousands of people around the world in their own emotional breakthroughs from trauma and all different things. And I'm not saying a trauma or, a person eats a lot, unhealthy, or of course, we're not comparing that to the depth of the pain of true addiction. But I believe it's the same thing, just taken to a further level across, right? It's taken further and further down, until the person fundamentally loses themselves. And that means they do not believe that they have ability to choose. I'm not talking about the humble moment of the first of the 12 steps, but it is when a person is really, they've lost the capacity to choose their own life. And I believe that the definition of addiction, my understanding in that sense, is the degree to which your actions, your thoughts, your speech, and all the parts of your consciousness are really acting in a way that is not in alignment with the will, that's sabotaging your will, your true self, your true values, and you feel helpless in your power to stop that. Right? And by that definition, you could say 98% of people are addicted to their cell phones today. And a lot of the definition of addiction really does fit cell phone addiction in that sense. But obviously, we're talking how far could that drop and how much more of those things get hardwired to the negative. But I want you to know what Rabbi Nachman says, and Rav Dessler says this as well. And the very, very powerful words, one day I'm happy to read them to you on the inside. But just off the top of my head, he says, I want you to know that no matter how far you fall, no matter how habituated you become at every level, you always have a soul, you never lose it, and you always have free will, the capacity to choose. He says it's a rule of life that it's never ultimately taken from us. And no matter what we've done, no matter how dark it gets, no matter how hardwired it is, he says in our own language, it's always there to choose out of. So the short answer to addiction, if you will, if you call that short, is that a person is simply hardwired all the dimensions of their psyche to associate them, their patterns of thinking, of feeling, of speaking, of talking with that, to a point where they feel they're unable to turn that around or control that. I'm interested to know if, when I say that, do people resonate with that? Does that sound true or not true to the nearly 500 people right there right now? I'm curious to know. What do you think about that, Ellie?
So in terms of, there were two things you said, which I want to go back to. One is about the disease model. So I want to flesh that out a little bit, because certainly from the 12 steps perspective, looking at it as a disease is the correct way, right? So I'll go into more what I understand.
What's the definition of disease?
Right, as a disease model. So I think what it's fighting against, the disease, is suggesting that it's a moral failing or a failing of willpower on some regard. And I know that this is probably the most common misunderstanding from anyone, like the superficial understanding of the 12 steps, right? Most people have seen in a movie at some point, hi, I'm Bob, I'm an alcoholic, right? They've seen that line. And then what a lot of people, and I've heard this from therapists, I've heard this from experts, is to say, why would I sit there and acknowledge after 15 or 20 years that I am an addict? Like, why would I want to take that on? And why don't I use the language of, I struggle with alcohol? Like, why do I say, like, I am an alcoholic, right? So I can tell you from my personal experience, this is where the disease comes in. It's not that we're powerless, which is another word, one of the first steps. It's not that we're powerless completely. It's that we're powerless alone. And that we need is the support of others and a connection, a spiritual connection with a higher power. And powerless
in the current state and the current way of operating. That's what we're saying.
Correct.
Before I step into a greater way of operating.
Yeah, one way when I'm speaking to people is, like, if I'm wrestling with a professional wrestler, I will not. I may debate them. I may do a lot of things, but I'm not getting in the ring with a professional wrestler. And what we see a lot of people try to do with addiction, everyone tries to do with their addiction, is in some way have their cake and eat it too, right? Can I somehow watch porn every so often, right? And still get the benefit without the downside? Can I still drink, here and there, right? Only in the evenings, and maybe I won't drink alcohol. I'll just drink wine. There's so many different variations of it. Anyone who's an addict has experienced this, right? Trying to figure out a way to have their cake and eat it too. And what the 12 steps introduced was, don't moderate this. You are powerless over it. Don't get in the ring with the wrestler and try to say, maybe if I grab his foot from this angle, I'll be able to topple him over. Like, no.
So it's not saying as an absolute statement. It's saying as the hashkafa, the angle that you need to understand to evolve to the next step of dealing with this.
There are things we can do to not get beat up by the wrestler, but one of them is not wrestling with him, right? It starts with that. So that's the first thing and the reason we do that is because you alluded to this in terms of the rationalization, and our ability to lie to ourselves is epic. I mean, just all of us as humans, that's the thing we do better than others, right? My bicep looks
fundamental human flaw, right?
My bicep looks so much better from my angle than it ever does from a camera. And this is just like every part of us we're able to do this with. And to be able to bring ourselves back to that very original place we were of, I tried. I can tell you where I stumbled pretty heavily is, so when I came into, I'd been in therapy for a while, and at some point, and a few times it was introduced that maybe I have an addiction to pornography, and I'm using it to medicate. Right. And I want to be clear, I'm not there may be a lot of people who have that message. I'm not anti-pornography. That's not my message. My message is that for those who struggle with it, to be honest about it. And that may be the first step to getting out of it, to be able to say, hey, I struggle with this, versus saying this is bad for anyone under all circumstances, right? The same way a recovering alcoholic is not saying all alcohol is bad under any and all circumstances. So I denied this for a number of years, even within therapy. First, I didn't even acknowledge it to my therapist for the first 3 or 4 years. Eventually, I came to that realization that I am addicted to this. I need all the help I can get. And I reached out to people who had experience with that. And as I started uncovering what was beneath it, a 3-year period of being sexually abused on a regular basis, that secret buried inside me for 15 years, the pain of feeling different always, right? I never felt like I quite belonged in any group. This sense was one of the reasons I didn't want to get drunk. I was afraid of what I would say. Like, I never wanted to show myself in any real way. And all of those things. So I say, okay, so now I'm sitting there for 3 or 4 years, really working through these things. So now if I've gotten to some of the source of the way the addiction developed, and I've healed some of those, and I've had some amazing experiences from it. I speak pretty often about this, and it's one of the things that have told me I feel like our experiences are more godly than anything else. So the reason I'm here speaking on this, and the reason I've been out there front and center, is because I'm one of the few people that I know who have had the experience of confronting the person who abused them.
Wow.
And to be able to kind of...
Was that a part of the 12-step process? Was that you working through things?
It was a combination of things. So it was therapy. It was recommended to me for a while. But it wasn't until I was in the 12-step process for about 6 or 12 months that experience happened. And in the 12 steps, it talks a lot about taking personal responsibility and getting rid of resentments and seeing everything as godly. So I was trying to put all of my experiences in that light, right? Was I abused? Was I chosen to be abused? Did this happen to me for a reason, specifically by this person, specifically in this way, and then to get this addiction and on and on and on, and to start looking in this way. And then eventually when I had that 3-hour meeting with him and I was able to right-size him in some way, and he was no longer this scary monster, I saw him as a pathetic person who had a lot of struggles and frankly has much worse memories than I have right now, right? And once I was able to do that, I said, wow, like I feel like this is healed in some way. I have to share this. But to go back to where I was, like the train I was on, is the lie I told myself was, now that I've healed some of these things, maybe I can go back to it in some way. Maybe I can reintroduce pornography in some healthy way, maybe even in the context of relationships.
Then the game began again, really.
Right. And that's like, this denial is always chasing us in some way, always chasing us to come back. And being that it's the first step, it's always the first step. It's the foundation of all of us, is that I can be back there tomorrow. Am I powerless today? Like, yes, I'm powerless, but I also haven't felt an urge for some time to view pornography, but at the same point in time, I know that the ditch is just as far from me as it always was. And that's why every meeting starts off with, I am an addict, right? That's who I am. And it's the first step is reminding us of our powerlessness, reminding us of the disease that we have. Yes, we've been able, I think a good analogy is diabetes. Yes, we're okay with the insulin and monitoring it. We're okay. We're just like anyone else. But if we stop the shots, if we stop the monitoring, we can fall off the deep end tomorrow. And that's that humble reminder that, hi, I'm an addict. Hi, I'm powerless, right? Introducing ourselves and always bringing us back to that state of humility and that state of honesty.
Can I say something to you, and you say right or wrong, right? I want to understand if I understood the certain mechanism that you said. First of all, I just want to say your story is really unbelievable. And I assume, and I know it will be inspiring to so many, and explains a lot about your journey, but it's not everybody is blessed to overcome the addiction. Not everyone is blessed to face the abuser. Not everyone is able to have those things. And
then the way he responded also was amazing. Like he started breaking down crying, right?
Wow.
Like that's not everyone's experience.
I mean, you'd wait for him to also start with his excuses and,
he started with that, but eventually he turned to the therapist and he said, can I go back home to my kids? Am I a monster? Because he abused me as a teenager, right? Meaning from my experience, it makes no difference.
He was a teenager?
He was a teenager, but if a teenager throws a mortar rocket,
it blows up, right?
The damage is the same. Yeah. But from the teenager's perspective, when they become an adult, it could be they can be different, right? And that from his perspective. Right. So he was saying, hey, I haven't done anything as an adult, right? And he took a lie detector test and everything else to support that. But still, once he saw the way he affected me, like I was able to break through those several layers of denial on his side. Mm-hmm. A, he really did it. B, it was definitively sexual, and C, it had a lifelong impact on me. He couldn't breathe. He was hyperventilating. And when I had that experience, that was very, very unique. And I've helped a number of people confront their abusers since that time. And no one had quite that same level of experience that I have. So I know it's very unique, and it's a reason I feel charged
to be vulnerable and to him to face it. I mean, it's profound for him and it's profound for you watching. Baruch Hashem, as much as I can say that appropriately, that you have to go through that, but that's a very, I'm sure, healing response. I have a question for you. And I know some people want us to go through the 12 steps, and we'll go through them. Mm. But I'm always have a red flag when a person says the MO of AA, if you will, is you have to stand up and say, I'm an alcoholic, I'm a sex addict, I'm still that. The classic idea is that in Chassidus is you are a nefesh elokis, you're a divine soul, and you're not that. And part of the ultimate healing comes from the shift of self-perception. Am I an addict? Am I a healed addict, or am I a divine soul? So to say that all of the life a person always has to think of themselves as an addict, again, I'm going to correct myself in a second, but I want you to tell me if I'm getting this process right or wrong. I see there's three steps. The first step is when we go through the pain, when we go through the trauma, and we're defined by the pain or defined by the trauma. I'm an addict, or I'm an abused child, fine. And then the second stage is the evolution, the awakening of consciousness, where I'm going to confront that. I'm going to give up break the addiction. I'm going to confront the abuser. And that's when we call I'm a survivor, or I've overcome it. But that's still a level of exile. It's still a level of identity. It's still, I'm defined. Sometimes I see, I'm blessed to know and help even a few, if I can say that, children or adults that have gone through sexual abuse, and overcome that and turn it around. And first, their life is defined by just trauma. And the second level is they work through their trauma and they confront and they build out, and then they're a survivor. But the word survivor still means to some degree they're defined and limited by that journey. And I think there's a level above that. Doesn't mean they forget it. It doesn't mean they forget the abuse, that they forget the horror. It doesn't mean they forget, that they've overcome that. But it's that they don't have to live a life that's defined by the positive or the negative of the darkness.
Yeah, So what's your question?
So here's my question. The question is, does a person really need to say forever, I'm an addict? Is that simply just an MO to make sure that for the foreseeable future, I will never self-deceive myself? And therefore, it's a way of keeping me framed in the right way. But truly, one day, I could be free. Or is it really the perception of AA or 12-step programs that you are that forever?
I certainly if you're walking into a meeting, you're that then.
You're
Right?
virtually that forever.
And I
You're
guess,
present.
is there the possibility that there are some outliers to that? Sure. Right. I don't think the AA, I don't think I don't think 12 steps wants to take a monopoly on anything, not God, not spirituality, not healing, not anything else. It's simply a path that has worked for many people. So while there may be a few people who can completely transform themselves, I think it's the 12 step, the founder's belief that most people need this forever. And to be clear, that's one truth that they're saying, right? Is say it from that perspective, but very clearly in the big book is the
Bible. Understood.
It's the book that was written is called Alcoholics Anonymous. But in the program, they call it the big book. And even other programs of 12 steps will always go back. That's kind of like the Bible. And it talks a lot about addicts. If you say, what is someone defined as? They're not defined as an alcoholic. Their life is defined by service. That's what it recommends more than anything, is to become a vehicle for God, for spirit to be able to channel his work through you. And that's what the 12 steps demands more than anything. So while there's the truth about addiction, if you read in the big book, it says very clearly that an alcoholic, a recovering alcoholic should not stop himself if he has a need to from walking into a bar, from going to a party, right? Or the equivalent with porn addiction. For 2 or 3 years, I had a lock on my phone, and I needed that for a time in order to stay away from porn. But between me, you, and everyone else watching this, if I need that forever, I am not recovered. I want to say I'm not recovered, because recovered sounds like an absolute. I'm not in a state of spiritual fitness.
Ellie, do you need that lock now?
I don't need that. No, I don't need that lock now.
What was the decision for you to remove that lock? Aren't you putting yourself at risk? Aren't you an addict?
Right. So that's exactly the question, right? So both truths are 100% there. Originally, I needed it because I found myself tripping up on it. But practically speaking, it's very inconvenient to have a lock on your phone. So you're sitting there, it's like, hey, I need to download this app. Or when I first was working to stop myself from watching pornography, what was interesting was one of the lies I told myself was it never affects my work. I don't watch on the work computer. But when I locked off all my other computers, then suddenly I'm sitting on my work computer and I wanted to. And you don't have to go to a porn site to see pornography. You can see it just on anything, including Google. So what I had to do was limit my computer to such a degree that I couldn't even see Google Images to make a basic presentation for a work project. So I would go to someone's desk in the office, and at that point in time, I wasn't as public about it. And I'd say, hey, I'm struggling with this presentation. I don't know why my computer's not downloading certain images.
That's what you did.
Can you help me with this? So meaning I had to go through major steps to be able to use technology or use anything else. And after a certain period of time, let me see what happens if I don't have it, and being honest with someone, right? So you're never working alone. What I heard from Rabbi Shais Taub, who wrote a great book on addiction, he says the ism that you spoke about earlier, the ism is I sponsor myself. Any ism, right, is like I'm my own boss. I know. And one of the things that the humility of the program that it teaches is check your check your stuff with someone else. Everyone needs someone to check themselves with. So I'm not making the decision. Right? Well, I'm just like, hey, it's been a while since I went there. You haven't got any notifications. There are some programs which will give you a notification if you try to break through, and it gives a notification to someone else. Like, would it be okay if I remove this from? What do you think? I'm just like, yeah, give it a shot and see how it works. And if you end up going back there, yeah, if I slip today, there'll be a lock on it tomorrow. There's no question about it. And I think it's sitting there with that understanding versus I'm some sort of addict, I'm less than. My wife, a lot of the pride that I have of being able to talk something like this, I have a wife and 2 kids and one on the way, God willing. And my wife, it's in many ways a bigger effort for me to stand on the TED stage and talk about porn addiction and things like that. But she's the one who gave...
You can do a TED talk about that from her perspective.
She's the one who gave me my pride, where what she told, she's like, I trust my husband more than most wives, probably more than most wives trust theirs, because of the work he's doing and because of the fact that he has
real with it.
So it's right. So it's not coming from the standpoint of, I know, let me give you actually a very practical example. I should have said this at the beginning and would sum it up. I don't get drunk under any circumstances.
Because?
I have a limit. I have a limit of two drinks. And what I tell people is if I go beyond that, I think I'm single. That's the only way I have explaining it. So it's understanding with that humility that I'm still very much an addict. And it's happened to me, and my relapses with pornography and with sex addiction happened almost always as a result of being drunk and allowing myself just to get a little bit loose. So understanding that I don't have that luxury, the same way a diabetic does not have the luxury. I'd be interested from a Kabbalah perspective if this exists, or maybe there's a level where this wouldn't exist ever, but I can't get to the place of being tipsy because of that understanding. But I walk with my head high. I don't
because of the understanding in one line that?
Because of the understanding that if I'm uninhibited, the way alcohol sets most people free, I will go back there.
Is that an understanding, or is that your tradition? Meaning, I know that that's where I got to. That's
no, this is not everyone's. This is not everyone's.
When I say tradition, I mean from your experience, you know that's where you get to.
Yes, I'm not saying this is blanket statement.
So my next statement is, from a basic Torah perspective, is that hardwired into you? Is that genetic predisposition? Or is that just because how we're programmed and you don't have the ability to change that? You couldn't work through that. There are many people that are born, for example, where we come from, non-religious, and we party, we hang out, and you train yourself, you open yourself up. I've worked with, hundreds of people one-on-one personally. They come with certain beliefs and certain habits. And all of Chassidus is about this core mechanism of when you open up into the vagus, when you open up to high connection, then in that place and in that state, you are able to bring up your assumptions, your beliefs, your habits, and you're able to release them in the light.
I'm not ruling it out, and I don't think the 12 steps would rule that out.
Right.
I think that if you're talking as a blanket statement and you're going to cover more people, you're going to cover more people with that protection of always remind yourself where you came from and the lies you've told yourself. So as a way to stay humble and be honest, but that's not to detract.
That's exactly the point. You said it right there. It's a way to stay humble and be honest. It's a way to keep yourself checked. It's a way to be real, to check yourself before you wreck yourself, right? But
Right.
is it an absolute statement, right? Is an absolute statement true? I can't believe it's true. I don't know whether they felt it's true. And I believe that absolutely all the way home change is possible.
No, there's very little dogma in the 12 steps, and there isn't much room for it. It allows for so much flexibility, and there's so much of it that it's like, if someone's practicing it and it's not working, and maybe there's something, it's not working with one sponsor, find someone whose tradition is slightly different, and there's different explanations. There isn't this rigid, like, that it got into the nitty gritty of every single thing. The prayers aren't specific. It recommends, one of the lines in there is, take, in the big book, is don't be afraid to take from religious people. Not a direct quote, but there's a lot of good that comes from religion. And if you're part of it, by all means, right? There isn't this dogma. So when people are projecting dogma onto the 12 steps, it's very similar to what you said about the Baal Shem Tov, right? He came to revolt against dogma, right? Not for then you to take his teachings and make them dogmatic.
Turn it back into.
Right. So no, that's certainly not. And there's flexibility. I've heard people describe themselves in a different way. I'm a recovered alcoholic. I'm a recovering alcoholic. I'm just an alcoholic. There's different, I struggle with alcohol addiction. You're not thrown out of the rooms if someone says, I struggle with alcohol addiction versus the standard, I am an alcoholic.
100%. I totally get it.
Would it be worth it to go through the 12 steps a little bit? I'd love to ask you some.
Let's do it.
Questions around it. So the first one I think we've touched on.
I think the first three are the same. I'm not meaning the first three, the very key category. And then after that, they're all, the next 4 or 5 appear to me to be a second category. And then the last 2 or 3 are also a third category. Like, that's how I break it down from a Torah perspective. But let's read them out. Do you want people here know it? Do you want to bring them on the screen? You'll remind me and we'll talk through them together.
Yeah, I don't know that I have a way to bring it up on the screen. But yeah, I think the first 3 are certainly foundational belief steps, right? Steps like being honest, and not an actual practice that someone is doing something, but more is getting themselves prepared. Steps 4 through 9 are action steps, and 10, 11, and 12 are maintenance steps. So I think that's the way they're.
Let me read this right now, because you know them better than me. You can run through them. I can do the same with the Sphira if you want to play that game. No, I really love it. I posted them on Facebook before. So number 1 is we admitted that we are powerless over alcohol, that our lives have become unmanageable. Number 2, we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Number 3, made a decision to turn our will over and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. Okay, let's take out the word as we understood him, meaning that is a very emotionally intelligent and sensitive way to open this up to lots of people, okay? But at the end of the day, the assumption here is there's a divine will, a higher being, a higher consciousness, fine. And this is what's called
why did you want to take out that words? Because one of the first, I wrote down a few questions that I wanted to ask you. And I said, what do you make of the concept of choosing your own definition of God, a God of your understanding? And you kind of suggested, you alluded to it by taking out those words, as we understood him.
I'm taking that out because what interests me is, what are physics? Physics is not a study of things called quarks, right? It's trying to understand what is objectively there and what are the properties that objective thing has. And when you're an educator, you're constantly separating between the language people are using and the subjective experience and the objective thing that they're trying to define. Okay, so if you take 10 million people, apparently that's what, the 12-step program work with. And I don't know what the numbers are. It's 50% have had incredible breakthroughs, or what percentage have a supernatural experience. There's a lot of Christians, a lot of Jews, there's a lot of Muslims, there's a lot of Buddhists, there's a lot of whoever you want, okay? So they're all describing Jesus came to me, Buddha came to me, not Buddha would come to me, but yes, people would describe that, right? What it was. And at the end of the day, I don't believe that all these manifest things are coming. I believe that there's one thing that's coming that people may experience through different filters and different sensitivities. There are other powers in the world and there are the forces, but from many of my own experience, I can tell you many, many stories, especially dealing with Christians and helping them. I believe that when they turn to Jesus, and I'm not here to be controversial or whatever, obviously I'm Jewish, so I don't believe in Jesus. Well, Jesus actually is, according to Kabbalah, a certain negative energy, a certain nature, whatever. But I believe when a person in rock bottom, when a person with a sincere heart turns, because in their childhood, they were told that God and Jesus are one or somehow connected, then they say, I don't want to say this as a rabbi, right? But they say, Jesus, help me, right? I believe God hears that. And I believe God says, fine, you can call it what you want and you can see it as you want, but I care for you, my beloved child, and I'm coming to help you. Okay. And therefore, when I'm trying to understand the physics, the science, the mechanism at play, I understand that that is a rich and sensitive, way to say, whoever you got told about, whatever you got to reach up higher. And I do believe, I can argue against what I'm going to say from a Kabbalistic perspective, I do believe that the God, the source, the one unified consciousness comes and helps you and loves you at that moment. By the way, it's well known that the founders were actually highly invested in Christianity and certain sects within Christianity, and that they covered over. They didn't want that to become known. His wife, Bill's wife, when she was on her deathbed, was asked about how much of the 12-step program was based on Emmanuel. What I mentioned before. This particular group of sect of Christianity, which is very mystical and experiential. And she said it wasn't. It was based on all open things, and it wasn't based on one thing. And then she added, it's a very funny line, and even if it was based on him, I wouldn't want to say because I want everyone to understand a general sense. So it's clear what their intent was. And I think being a person that has had profound spiritual experiences and transformation, being a person that facilitates that for thousands of people, this stuff is a reality. If you're in the right state with the right attitude, with the right intent, right, then this gets triggered and that transformational effect takes place. Absolutely it does. And I've seen it happen to thousands of people. Again, I've seen it to myself many, many, many times. So with that in mind, you can dial whatever number you want, but there's someone who's going to answer the phone.
Right. So from the big book's perspective, right, it's not, I understand what you're saying. If I understand correctly, you're saying that there is an objective truth about God, and it's not as you understand him that makes him so, and even calling it him, whatever, right?
It's not like if you think that God is a big emu in the sky, then actually a big emu comes to help you.
Right. So what the big book is talking about is a spiritual program to help people recovering from addiction. And it's not getting into those territories. So there's two parts to it. One is that it's saying like, that's enough. In order for someone to start the process of saying there is a power greater than yourself, because where we spoke about from the beginning with Rav Nachman is that selfishness, right? The self-centeredness, like that's what destroys the addict, right? That's what the 12 steps talks about. The spiritual solution is to rise above self. And why so much of the 12 steps is service and helping the other addict is to get out of one's own one's own head. And that's enough to get to the place of there's another belief. But the way I read that, because I had a lot of trouble with that also, the God of your understanding, right? Like, what is that? But the way I understood that is the first time I read it, it comes across as a very passive instruction, right? Just, made a decision, turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him, whatever the hell, right? Just fill in the blanks, whatever you want. But now I've through working the steps and through working with people, I have a different take on it. And I think what it is, it's saying, as we understood him, meaning you have to do the work to try to understand him. That's part of the process, is to go through and understand as best as you could, versus saying, oh, as we understood, whatever, it doesn't make a difference. God could be, they say the doorknob of the AA room is God, or God stands for group of drunks or whatever else. And those are all okay from a recovery standpoint. And really, there's 12 steps. The second step came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. It doesn't even talk about God. It just talks about a power that's greater than ourselves, right? And if we can get outside of ourselves and realize that we're not the greatest power, that becomes the foundation of it.
I hear what you say. Allow me to give you some of the context of the mystical books that they were reading at the time.
Good.
Whether it's William James's book, Defining the Definition of the Spiritual Experience in Many Different Paths, whether it was from the classics of New Thought. I don't know if you've ever seen this. I've told you about it. There's this great book, One Simple Idea, by Mitch Hubowitz. And he actually goes to the founding of the New Age movement in America, which is called New Thought. And he lists in great depth all of Bill Wilson's favorite books, all the people he was hanging out with, and I can read it to you one by one, where he even got the word higher power from. The phrase higher power entered AA's lexicon through Ralph Waldo Trine's New Thought bestseller, In Tune with the Infinite, a famous book of Bob Smith's. So listen to this. Trine repeatedly used the term with particular reference to alcohol. This is a quote from the book that Bill Wilson said was one of his favorite books. Quote, in the degree that we come into realization of the higher powers of the mind and spirit, mind and soul, there also falls away the desire for the heavier, grosser, less valuable kinds of food and drink, such as the flesh of animals and alcoholic drinks, right? So he was calling on these books, which were the New Age language of the time, which was trying to say, God is a dogmatic word. Let's call it higher power, higher soul, higher destiny. That's number one. Jung, as we know, that part of the Oxford School, he met different people, and Jung himself was the one that triggered this idea that someone came to Jung and couldn't get healed even through Jung. And Jung said, often I've hardly ever seen alcoholics recover
unless they had a profound
spiritual through a super experience with the divine, etc. There was a countless amount of things that they were actually reading at the time. There's a whole list of all the things that they were into. The core of it is, my understanding, I'm not saying this in a superficial way, the essence of Kabbalah, the essence of Hasidus, is that you have a divine soul. There's an infinite light. There's an infinite creator. There's an infinite light around you. And all of reality and all of Hashgacha and all of providence is trying to get you to open up, bittul yesh, bittul b'mitzias, is to nullify your ego, your sense of shlita, of control, and to melt in and realize and make a dira b'tachtonim. The definition of malchus, the definition of being a receptor, is leis lo magama klum, that I have nothing of my own. And when I teach people how to access Dveikus, based on Chassidus, you say to them exactly these lines. Knowing nothing about Alcoholics Anonymous, you say to them, whatever you know him as, what if it's a he, a her, an it, whatever you've been told, there's an infinite life that loves you, an infinite soul above you, an infinite being. And if you can just choose to stop your mind and stop your ego and fall back, right? And be open to what is ever there and say, I want to be open. The Rebbe Rashab says, the fifth of the Chabad Tzaddikim, he says that even when we do this inner work, if we do it in the name of divine, if we do it, I want to connect to Hashem, that it actually empowers the work and the opening even more. When you tell people to do that, 100 people in the room, 1,000 people in the room, they suddenly open divine up to higher experiences. When you say to people, connect to God, some people like the God word.
Right,
and
it's a tainted
have
word.
Bad associations.
100%.
So you're always looking for a way to say, There's an infinite light, an infinite consciousness, and infinite energy. That's part of the meditation. It's around you. It's within you, right? It's around you, within you, and it loves you, and it's waiting for you, and you think you're in control, and you're thinking about yesterday, today, and tomorrow. When you speak like that in that language, people fall back into the very experience that their whole friends that started it had to have that breakthrough moment. So when you read Chassidus as information, as great Torahs, there's one way to read it. When you have the experiences and you realize it's teaching me the instructions, it's a language of experience that when you say it in a certain way, people fall into. It's no longer interesting words. It's a meditational textbook to invoke immediately real-time divine experience. When you read the 12 steps in that language, rather than it's a philosophical thing of the God that you can understand, it means however you've understood him, because we started with the Christian thing. So I'm not here to tell you Jewish thing, you should get into Jesus. I don't want you Jews telling us not to. However you think it is, there's something greater, extraordinary, a light above, a higher power. Can you open to that? And I believe when you speak to people in that way, boom, the opening happens. So I'm shifting it out of what you said, I think is a beautiful understanding, but I would, being who I am in my journey, unravel it into, I always say you only know Pshat and Chassidus when that Pshat takes you to Dveikus. And if not, it's just an interesting interpretation.
So it sounds like what you're saying is the essential things that exist in the 12 steps, for the most part, although certain practices may differ a little bit, in general, are founded or exist within Kabbalah and within Chassidus, and maybe a distinction that the 12 steps, not a distinction, but something that the 12 steps brings is it's actually in action, right? Meaning a practice of how to get a group.
When you are in rock bottom, you don't want to hear philosophy.
No, you need action. You need specific action.
That's it. That means, that's what I feel that all the time. When a person comes to you, my marriage is falling apart. You don't want to break down one of the Kabbalistic models of masculine and feminine. You need to blow me out of my body. Let me escape this trauma and pain right now. I need to be opened up to supernatural because I've tried everything and nothing works. And I've tried 1,000 times to get myself through and I can't handle it one more day. Do you have something that helps, or do you not have something that helps? And I believe this something that helps was what the Baal Shem Tov wanted to redeliver. Let me play a game. Let me run through the 12 steps in literally 30 seconds and just show you how I frame them. You ready?
Go ahead. Okay.
The first is we admit we are powerless. That is called bittul yesh. That's called enough. I just read you straight. Al yedei bittul hagaiva. That's what Rabbi Nachman says straight up, right? When you and the less that you are, the more of a clear vessel you are open to divine influx, right? Emanuel Swedenborg, that was his whole line, that you cleanse out your vessel and you're open to divine influx. That's classic Baal Shem Tov. And that's what they taught. That they was the Rebbe of the family of his wife. Fine. So first, I am nothing, right? And there's nothing I can do. It's a bittul yesh. The second is, I believe that there's a power greater than ourselves that has the power to turn this around. I am nothing. Hashem is there. Classic line, okay? And then made a decision to turn our will and lives over to the care of God, however understand him. Whatever you think it is, you think it was Yoshka, you think it was this or that, fine. The light is there. Your higher soul, your higher wisdom, your higher truth. It's more than you can rationally understand. If you don't understand the Bible, it doesn't matter. There is something that we've experienced, that we've blown out of our bodies and kissed it. You may know it. You may have had psilocybin. You may have had LSD. You may have had ayahuasca. You may have been in that Buddhist meditation retreat. This is what I say to people all the time. I want you to close your eyes and you know there's something greater. You've had that higher sense of self, that inner guidance, whatever you call it, there's something greater. By tuning into what the greatest epic sense of what you know is, you are opening yourself up psychically to that opportunity. And when you lock in on that and you say, I am now willing, this is the script that I literally say when I teach meditation.
Go ahead.
And right?
Exactly what you said.
It's exactly what you said. There's something greater than your higher soul. I want you to count back from 5 to 1. I want you to let go and I want you to release into whatever it is and it's there. And that itself opens up the revelation, right? Now, once I want you to know that according to Kabbalah and according to Chassidus and the Baal Shem Tov and Rabbi Nachman and 1,000 other sources, the way of self-transformation is the following thing. You get into a state of Dveikus, which is higher revelation, supernatural experience, the Das Elyon, the higher self. When you're confronted by your infinite potential, it's called the Alma de Chavis, the world of freedom. You're free of your pain, of your trauma, of your habits. It's a state of infinite connection. So every religion talks about it. So many people in the Jewish religion have talked about it. That was the path of the prophets. The Piazetz, the Rebbe discusses this in detail. And then what you do is, in that state, you bring up, and I'm telling you, I do this quote unquote professionally. It sounds like I actually get paid sometimes, but this is what you see every day. Then you bring up their pain, their trauma, their doubt, while they're in this extraordinary, light-filled, unified, expansive state. And the Tanya says, and 1,000 other sources say, Harim kedonagna mesuma lifnei Hashem. When you bring up the pain, when you bring up the trauma, when you bring up the doubt, when you bring up the history, when you said you're sexually abused. So what does that mean? Sexually abused, okay. So sexual abuse is not one thing. It's many things, right? There's the pain, there's the pleasure, there's the loss confusion of trust of authority figures, there's the shame connected to that, there's the fear connected, and then the parents don't listen, right? So there's all these levels. The reason these people can't heal themselves is because the secret of all healing, according to Chassidus, is if you take up one of those things, Ellie, and you bring that to the light, it melts away. But when there's so many of these things compounding, then we can't find the self to do the tikkun, to do the healing. We can't find the das. Im ein das havdalah minayin. When you're in this light, people have, the first time I taught a meditation like this, and a woman said she had panic attacks all her life. And she said when she got into Dvekas, in the first 2 hours of a 2-day retreat, the panic attacks came up for a second, it released, and she never had it again in her life. So everything melts and releases in that life, in that moment. So here we go. The first 3 steps is you access that divine revelation state. But then what you want to do is simply called, number 4, make a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. Everybody knows in Torah is this word, it's called cheshbon nefesh. It's not enough to access the light. What we have to be willing to do is take the light down into it. And cheshbon nefesh means it's not enough to say I was abused. I have to unpack all the feelings and all the trauma and every single clipper, every single association. This is what you help when you work with people, with Hasidus. This is what you teach them to do, right? And everyone that they can bring up, and they can shift their beliefs about it, and they can shift their emotions about it, and their self-perceptions about it, and shift the body triggers, the body, habituated nature, the fight or flight mode, and they can bring and heal and release that. So once you've had the light and that clarity, now you have to now do the Bina work that go in and into the heart work. The first is to go out of the body to be free and to realize the infinite light and potential. And then you take that down. So now you do the cheshbon nefesh, and that's the beginning of tshuva, all the details, right? And then 5, admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being, the exact nature of our wrongs. This is Shulchan Aruch, and it's Kabbalah as well. You have to do vidui peh, part of transformation. Tshuva means to release the ego and the pain and the trauma, and to return psychologically and spiritually to my pure, true, infinite light self.
So I want to slow down a little bit on this one because the way, at least the tradition of it, the way it's typically handed down, at least the way it was handed down to me, was the 4th step is meant to be written, right? We won't take an inventory, and in the big book it actually goes in. So every business has to take an inventory, and the business, you have to take a written inventory, right? You can't have 3 and you're not going to remember everything. It's a written. Right. And then the 5th step has to be a spoken inventory. So that process, is there something about spoken and written about our, like you're saying the Shulchan Aruch, but those 2 dynamics.
I would put it simply as the following thing. That the written is about the internal self-exploration. That is the value of writing. It slows our mind down. It makes us methodical. It makes us deeply aware of every detail. Number 1. In halacha, we cannot release our past and our trauma mistakes until we speak it out in words to a shem or to a tzaddik or to another person. I told you the Chabura of they used to speak out, and I can show you many texts and Hasidic sources where you say you have to find someone to speak it out. Rabbi Nachman says, go and speak it out before a tzaddik, and you have to speak it out, or speak it out before Hashem. And it says in
what does that mean, speak it out before Hashem? Because that can easily sound like doing nothing.
When I do that, and when I teach how to do this, part of his Bodedus, Rabbi Nachman says, it is the most powerful emotional release experience you can have.
So what is someone practically doing in that? So if I'm watching someone, what am I seeing?
Okay, first I'm writing it out.
Something?
First I'm writing it out because it means I want to really understand it. I want to know, am I dealing with I was raped. So I was raped. But what was in that? And what are the things? And what are the relationships that blew apart? And what are the resentments that I carry? So I really want to unpack that, because I have to know I don't want to reduce it. It's a shopping list of all that I have to release, of all that I have to overcome. So much of addiction, so much that people fall into addiction is not because one thing they've gone through, but it's the compound effect of so many levels that they can't begin to unpack themselves. That's why they flee to drugs, they flee to something else, because it's such an overwhelming sense of everything. So you have to untangle that knotted ball. And to find out, I always say to people, when you begin to unravel your stuff, you think you have so much wrong with you. You think it's infinitely dark. And that's why you have to flee to everything in the world. But what's miraculous, when you begin to unravel, you actually see, you know what? There's 7 main things I've been carrying. You know, there's 7 main things. There's 6 main things. There's 9 main things. And suddenly it becomes, you know what? I could unravel each one. I could find the people to speak to. I could own that. I could move on. And that's what becomes tangible. Now, the answer to your question is, Rabbi Nachman talks about in his Bodhisattva, when you teach a person to get into a deeper state of consciousness called Dveikus, and to begin to say, I carried that fear and I felt I was nothing. And I felt, because I went through, that I must be a victim. And I actually took, even though, the guy was such an idiot and such a Rasha, I said, I must be responsible. Maybe there's something I did wrong. But I am not responsible, Hashem. This is from you. And there's a gift in there, something I'm supposed to learn. And I have infinite courage and infinite strength. And I'm sorry for ever thinking that. I'm sorry, God forbid, that if I did something like that, I'm sorry I went after my desire. That is not who I am. The speech itself is speaking it out of you. Because this is the core of all of Hasidus.
So when someone is admitting it to Hashem, what you're saying, it's actually an audible speech.
Yes, actually halakhically has to be out loud. Eli, let me just speak it out in the most basic psychological way. As you said before, what a miracle that the abuser acknowledged it, because no one wants to acknowledge it. How does it feel to say for the first time, my name's Eli and I'm a porn addict?
How did it feel to say that for the first time?
Yeah.
It was extremely difficult the first time. Now it just is.
I want to rewind for a second. It was difficult. Was it meaningful? Was it powerful?
Yeah, it was all of those. Yeah. It was massively powerful.
Why? Did you just say words?
I think it was just acknowledging that it is.
It's acknowledging, which starts like an internal explosion, that I can exist and I can objectify the failure or the pain. And I can see, here is me and here is the words. I'm still breathing. I still have a pulse. 100 tons didn't fall on my head. Nobody stoned me in the room. I'm able to acknowledge without burying it and hiding within myself. I can hold space for myself. They can hold space for me. Hashem can hold space for all of it. And when you do that, it comes up and it kind of goes poof. And it loses its power, doesn't it? It loses its choke over you. And you say it again and say it again. This is exactly the power of realizing that this fear does not define me, and there's a me that can speak and not be afraid of it. I can give it expression, I can give it form, I can look at it, hey, look, I said that. And then suddenly there's a me and an it, and it no longer is like this, but it's now like this. You see the difference there? And that is part of the uncoupling of sin from ourselves, of darkness from ourselves. Speech is very, very powerful, objectifying something and taking it out of ourselves so it no longer defines us. And there's Kabbalistic things I can talk about this, but there's many times when I'm working with someone and they got trauma, got pain, or have done bad things, I put them in a state of Dveikus. I say, find what it is. And they say, it's guilt. And I say, just repeat the word guilt. I can show you this in a Kabbalistic text. And they say guilt, hate, guilt. And then suddenly after a minute, it has no negativity over that, no control over them. And they say, I messed up. I did such a dark thing. And suddenly after 10 years, when they're saying, I can't say that. Suddenly it's just words. And the inner effect is it releases and dissipates from within. And
right, that feels most true for me.
Energetic release of vidui peh, of expressing it through mouth.
What that feels most true for me was actually about the abuse, because that was a secret that I kept for longer, like 15 years. I didn't say it to anybody. And then the way I've described it afterwards was that when someone asked me, I went to a psychologist because I was struggling with issues related to assertiveness. And he said to me, within 15, 20 minutes of meeting me, were you sexually abused? And I just said, yes. And the way I described it to others afterwards was that I was shocked that I didn't go up in a cloud of smoke, because it was something I never wanted to tell anyone under any circumstance. There he asked me, I said it.
Ellie, why? Let's play the game.
Right.
Why do you want to say it? But you were.
Why? There's something about making it true, making it real that scared me, acknowledging it.
And then what does speech do?
Right. I guess the way, externalizing it in
What's
some
your
way,
words?
But it also made it smaller. And so that's probably the best way. It made it smaller.
It externalizes the idea out, but suddenly the intensity releases in real time when it comes out. Like your TED extraordinary video is being seen by how many millions of people? 1.5 million, whatever that is. Imagine when the doctor said you were sexually abused, imagine suddenly there's 1 million people in front of you. Would you have said yes?
Right.
So how much diffusion, release? How many times do you have to speak it out till you can have the courage to stand in that stage? So what is that stuff? So according to Kabbalah and Chassidus and Halacha, Shulchan Aruch, all that fear and all that doubt that we carry within us can be released through expression. That's a very deep secret, to get something off your chest. And when you learn how to do this in a meditational state, Ellie, you feel in real time going, oh, say guilt 1,000 times. And you feel it's literally, there's an energetic shift from within you to beyond you. Is anyone watching this? There's a phone of something people. Does this make sense to anyone? Is it resonating? It's not. So first you have to understand what are all the elements I'm dealing with, right? And then what I need to do is release the buildup, the tension, the darkness from each one.
All right, so both those things exist, right? So in terms of the writing, you actually, the way you described it gave me a new understanding, because I kind of brushed through when I was reading step 5, admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being. The way I always understood it was really focus on the other human being, and the others will follow. But you're saying it as admitted to God. Now I got to get to a state where I'm conscious of that connection.
Yeah, well, obviously, if you're admitting to God, that it's not just about the other human being, because then how would it help? I'm not talking out with the person, I'm talking out with God. Why am I talking out with myself? Go and pick up the phone. So,
right, so there's actually several different instructions.
But this is in halacha. I want you to know, what is the mechanism called this is effect? I can do it. I don't mind doing this in front of 500 people. We can take some time. I'll show you the technique, and you will find by taking your darkness, your trauma, your guilt, whatever it is, by speaking out rather than hiding it, burying it, denying it. But you do it in das. That's the secret. You do it mindfully. You do it consciously, to realize that you are greater than this, and therefore you can say it. It does not define you. It does not limit you. It does not condemn you. There's you and there's the mistake, but I am not the mistake. Whether I traumatized another, whether I was traumatized, that it is the rebirth of Das. It is the reawakening of the conscious self. And when you see there's a self that's not buried under everything, when it comes out, then you can begin to literally set it free. It flies out of you.
I want to leave time for Q&A. I want to do it later, but an interesting question came in, which I'm guessing is from a personal experience. What if it's been voiced and it didn't dissolve? Then what?
I'm not going to answer you from an AA perspective. I'm going to answer you as if you asked that on my meditation retreat. You didn't do it with Das. You have to be in a state which is greater than the pain. We all know what it's like. I can go to a friend's place dealing with a lot of pain, a lot of anger, and I can talk. My friend says, let's sit down and talk about it. You can have the conversation where you talk about it, you talk it through, you come out feeling so much lighter, more connected, more grounded, whatever. You also know what it's like. You sit down, you talk about your pain, your fear, and you walk out more angry, more upset. Okay, what's the difference, right? So we all know that experience. The difference is when you're in Dvakas, when you get to a deeper state and you talk it out for the sake of seeing perspective, then it releases in real time. But if I'm sunken and re-traumatizing myself through it, right? That's some of the where trauma therapy goes wrong. Some people say I sat on the therapist's couch and we went through the whole situation. I came out feeling liberated. And other people say I walked out feeling more angry,
re-traumatized.
More re-traumatized. So the difference is, according to Chassidus and Kabbalah, the state of the consciousness you're in. When someone comes to me to do that work, the first thing I do is teach them how to meditate, access Dvakas. When they're in that expanded state of light, I say, now let's speak. Now tell me your story. And at the end of the story, they're like, whoa.
This is very similar. So I spoke to a therapist a little while ago who doesn't believe in talk-based therapy and
Amen.
uses somatic therapy. And then,
Excellent.
so she uses specifically dance, but in my own experience, it sounds like EMDR, right? So getting into a space of that, would you consider that the same thing? Right?
EMDR is literally brought down word for word in the Baal Shem Tov 300 years ago. And he describes EMDR as when you move your eyes from side to side. He says when strong and physical emotions come up, that you can no longer connect to your soul. He says if you move your eyes from side to side, then you can reconnect to the inner light, and it releases and melts away the darkness within us. So that is one of the many classic techniques of if you can access a deeper state of consciousness, then you can rapidly release. That's connected with EFT. It's connected with TAT. It's connected with a lot of these modalities are all moving around the same point. And by the way,
what you're saying is to get to that place of das.
Yes. If you move your eyes side to side, you can't think in a conscious, intellectual way because you've knocked yourself to a higher awareness, right? Because it's disorientating, right?
Right.
And the Baal Shem Tov says it knocks you into a relative state of devakas through which automatically it melts away. Now, it doesn't mean that EMDR works for everyone, because some people are so trapped in the lower consciousness that even that doesn't help, and you need to learn more radical tools to do it. But it's the same core mechanism is what I'm bringing up. That's why Bill Wilson could, he was on a hallucinogenic. Bill Wilson's paternal grandfather, who was also an alcoholic, overcame that with a psilocybin. He apparently took mushrooms or something walking the forest, and he overcame. Sounds like a lot of the research being done today. You and I have discussed a little as well. But he had a history in his family that his grandfather overcame alcoholic addiction by having a hallucinogenic trip. He himself was on the belladonna treatment, when he had his breakthrough and turned to God. He himself did exploration with LSD in the 50s, hoping that he could give that to the AA people as a way to move them.
You're not recommending that, though.
I'm not recommending that, though. If it's done in a medical way, then, if it's done and that research is being done today, then it can absolutely be helpful. What I'm saying is you don't need that, and it can be done in another way if you understand the mechanism of Kabbalah and Chassidus. Can I show you a couple more of just talking that out? Is this interesting for you?
Yes, but I think to getting through the rest of the steps may be helpful.
Yeah, that's what I mean. To talk out more. That's what I mean.
Okay.
So I was pointing to my screen. You can't see where my finger's pointing?
Oh, no.
So
I think we went through the first 5.
Right. So it's making sense so far. So these are mechanisms in Halacha and Chazal and the Talmud and Gemara and Chassidus and Kabbalah, just talking out normal inner transformation. So now we're up to we've admitted to God and to another human being
We're entirely ready.
Nature of our true wrongs, right? That's good. Vidoi Peh, Rabbi Nachman says 1,000 times, if you go to a tzaddik in higher consciousness, who's in consciousness, and you tell them your sins, then they melt away before you. The trauma melts away within you. Rabbi Nachman says
you're saying not in person, but just also out loud. And
you go to a person in higher consciousness, a tzaddik, a spiritual master, and you speak out loud in front of them your sins. He says that it will energetically releases from you in the moment.
So I want to make sure I understand what you're saying. You're talking physically going to that person.
Yes. Or they could also say you can do it by the graveside or something like that energetically.
Got it.
So just to show you how much this is an obvious part of our tradition. Fine. 7, humbly ask him to remove our shortcomings.
6, you gloss through 6.
Skip 6. We're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. Okay. So defects of character is called midas ra'as. And this is the main tefillah I can show you. I was reading the Sivish Shalom today with my 9-year-old and 11-year-old, that the main tachlis purpose of all of the Torah is to remove our negative emotions. And you see how he's saying here, he's obviously taking a shift, which is obvious. He's not asking us just to remove our alcoholism or addiction, right? He's saying these defects of character. What are the emotions behind this?
In the big book, they call it the symptom, right? The alcohol is a symptom. It's not
That's right.
Not even a symptom. I'm sorry. He calls it a symbol.
It's a symbol.
It's a symbol.
Fine. We can call it whatever we want, but anyone thinks that the person is addicted just because, alcohol is addictive, right? What made that person psychologically vulnerable to that situation? And that is there's some, in their das tachton, in their normal psychological consciousness, there's something destabilizing them, right? That's causing them not to be happy, not to be connected. And the solution to that, according to Chassidus, is enter into divine higher connection, higher bonding. But the addict enters into bonding with things in the physical world to escape the imbalance within themselves. I always thought it was funny. I wouldn't use these terms in a normal lecture, but here it has a context. Sex, drugs, and rock and roll. All of those things are clippers of supernatural connection of Dveikus. Sex is the bonding and connection with beyond the self. Drugs is the spiritual connection beyond oneself. And even music is what the prophets use to achieve higher consciousness, higher awareness. The word shira is hashras hashchina, that divine revelation should come down into me. The Oxford group, by the way, for one of the main sources of AA that Bill Wilson and all his friends went to, they actually had that you're supposed to meditate once a day. You can see the instructions. You have to sit quietly and meditate and get divine inspiration. And they actually say that a still small voice will come to you and guide you spiritually in what you have to work on. That's textbook Hasidus. So that idea of sex and drugs and rock and roll is we are fleeing our destabilized self of trauma, of pain, of childhood trauma, whatever it is, which is all come together that I can't find myself under that. But I'm seeking the spiritual experience through all these things that are just kind of fallen versions of the spiritual experience. Drugs are a fallen version of the spiritual experience, as is music, as is sexuality when we're not done with holiness. So
step 6 is really about like a willingness, right? So do we see that concept there?
I would say the entirely ready, it means, this is one of the things I find fascinating. If you look at modern personal psychology, you look at Tony Robbins, you look at all these kind of things, all these books that say, I can overcome my blocks and my issues through this technique. I was picking up this book, reading, have you ever seen this book? Bestseller, New York Times bestseller.
I've seen it, but I haven't read it. Yeah.
The Power of Habit, how to overcome your habits. That's what I was doing. So it's a really great book until you actually know about truth and Kabbalah in the world. He actually kind of tears through Alcoholics Anonymous and says, they actually, he brings scientific research that says they actually discovered that a lot of people think that scientifically they believe that Alcoholics Anonymous works because you have basically, their model of addiction is there's a trigger, there's a response to the trigger, there's something you do, a habit based on the trigger, and there's a reward you get from it. And that's the triad to breaking habits. There's a trigger, there's a habit you have, and there's a reward you get from it. And he says that the Alcoholics Anonymous works because the trigger is still there, I want my hits, but then you recondition yourself to change your habit. Rather than going to get a hit, then you call up your sponsor, you go to the group, etc. And then the reward you get is you feel bonding and unity with others, etc., etc. But then he actually says there's research to show that scientifically, many people, that if you think that's the only thing that works, they said that many people that only had that model and didn't have the God model, and they did research, I don't know, thousands they studied 1,000 people. They said the people that didn't bring in the God model into that part of AA, then after a period of time when stress or anxiety came up in their life, then they fell off the bandwagon. He said God was the difference that made the difference. The belief in God held them on even when times of stress came. But he said that is not sound from a scientific methodology. So they realized it wasn't belief and it was God. It was just belief in general that was helping people. But what they did is they stripped out the scientists, and that book decided, because now, as my wife said, he's selling you a book about how you can train yourself with new habits. So it doesn't fit his hypothesis to bring in God. He literally says it doesn't fit the scientist hypothesis of being in God. So they negate that. But more than Tony Robbins and more than all these books and self-help and self-development, there's absolutely a rule, and I brought down from the Rebbe Rashab and other sources, that it's not enough to say, I'm going to use psychological tricks or ability to overcome my emotional blocks, these defects of character. But I actually have to say, Hashem, I want you to do that. And that opens up supernatural ability to do that. In the first 3 steps, we're acknowledging Hashem in an infinite way that he's there. And in general, I want help. Once I get to 4 or 5, I'm starting to unravel the psychological knots and untangle them and take responsibility for them. But part of that is to realize that I can't even fix my own mess, right? That I still need to invite Hashem into the specific details. Okay.
In the words of the big book, that God could and would if he were sought.
He could and would. And counteracting normal psychology or pop psychology, all the cool tricks that you learn and therapeutic modalities are not enough unless you open. They won't go deep enough and in enough. Fine. 7, very simple. 7 is, so now Hashem, I want you to do that, right? It's not enough to acknowledge that he could. I have to have the humility and ask. Okay. 8, Now, this is in halacha again. Halacha this is in the Shulchan Aruch, this is in the Chazal, and the Talmud. It's very simple. Hashem will not forgive you, or Hashem forgives you for the acts you do against him and yourself, but he does not forgive you for acts that you do to others until you personally apologize for them. That is the main halacha where we know before Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur that we are obligated to apologize for others. According to the Shulchan Aruch, even dead people, we have to go to their gravesite or energetically connect to them by ask for it. That means we cannot rectify ourselves and be energetically released from our destructive nature until we directly interact with those people. 8, made a list of all persons we have harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. 9, made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except where we would do so would injure them or others. That is literally in halacha. That's literally in Mishnah Berurah and Shulchan Aruch. When do you not go up to a person and apologize? When do you not go to say to them, by the way, this is what I did to your wife and I have to ask for apologies, right? So the answer is when that would cause more trauma to them than they're aware of, then you cannot do that, right? So again, that's halacha, that's Buddha. It's pretty fascinating to see it that way. 10, continue to take personal inventory. Now, I think now we're shifting. So the first 3, I think, is general opening up to divine supernatural connection. Then 4 to 9 is basic literal tshuva, to find out all the things I'm carrying, to unravel them, to give each one to Hashem, to go and do that healing with others and connect myself. And then 9 is also a part of tshuva. 10 is also part of tshuva, but it's also part of the basis of avodas Hashem. That is not a one-time thing, right? Part of the definition of tshuva is you commit to never going to that place again, never getting stuck to this place again. And part of, if anyone knows, if you really want to be different next time and you don't want to collapse your life again, then you need to set up a way of living where this is not, I was broken and now I'm fixed, back to the fun life. This is, I'm now living with the integrity. I'm living the responsibility. I'm paying this forward to maintain the spiritual path forever.
So this is very similar to that idea of the addict, right? Meaning it's someone announcing that they're an addict. It's that continuation of the work, the humility, the acknowledgement that they're not fixed, but certainly not to be stepped on.
I could put it 2 ways, Ellie. One is I'm not fixed. The other one is when you live life, you're going to make mistakes again. Forget about addiction. Correct. We're going to lie. We're going to get confused. We're going to buckle sometime. The difference between who I am now is I'm not going to let it build up. I'm not going to let it overwhelm me. I teach my kids how to go to Devekas and meditation every night before they go to sleep and release all the mistakes in a beautiful, empowering way. So you don't even have to carry that into your sleep. And that's in halacha as well, right? So,
the big book talks about this as a daily practice. So when it says continued, take personal inventory, it's specific that it's a daily
practice. Nachman says every day, 1 hour to cheshbon nefesh in this Buddhism. 1 hour every day. That they're starting than you guys, right? but that's a commitment, and all the breast lovers swear by it, right? 1 hour, and Rabbi Nachman says you have to go into the fast, you have to get into the Vekas, higher connection, you have to confess everything you did that day, you have to do tshuva and turn around, because the thing that brought the addict to that place was not the chemicals, it was not the genetic predisposition, it was the build-up.
I was going to use the same word. I was going to use the words build-up. Yeah.
What's that?
I was going to use the word build up.
The clip is building up. I always say, again, who am I to say, and I hope my children never go through it, but I've dealt with enough kids that have been sexually abused. I literally shake when I'm saying this, Ellie, and who am I to speak to you? But I sincerely believe, as awful and devastating as sexual abuse is, I don't believe the sexual part is the most destructive part. It's what it does to authority. It's the words that they say to destroy the trust. Is that nobody cared for me, was there for me. There's so many things that shatter the consciousness around that act, right? And the fact that lives, one of the prayers I had when I was helping 2 people at the same time with this, and I was like shaking, please, can this never happen to my kids? One of the prayers that came out to me, and it's such an awful thing to say, I'm just being real with you now, is if God forbid it ever happened to my children, to any of our children, at least could we find out immediately? And obviously, that's not a prayer.
when you spoke when you were speaking before about going into the details of it and speaking the truth was not that I was sexually abused. That wasn't,
Right.
that was like, that's one aspect of it. But the
Right.
truth is that I felt more safe with him than I did with any other authority and adult figure in my life at that point. I felt like he liked me more than others. And to speak, I felt more love from him than others. And I'm not putting it on the other people in my life. I'm just saying,
Right.
that is the truth.
That's
What I
the
felt.
psychological fallout of all the dynamics, of all the relationships, of all the perception of self, of all of trust, lack of trust, of authority, and all that distortion of that relationship that gets a person into that place. That is what shatters the consciousness for decades, more than, God forbid, the act. And that is what needs the unraveling. And that is why the secret of that is what leads to the drugs, what leads to the alcohol is not the act, it's not the trauma, it's not the moment. It's the entanglement of, it's called tohu vohu. It's the chaos and disorder of all our emotions all intertwined that I can't find myself under that. And I can't find clear, healthy motivation. And that is what we commit to. If you go to rock bottom, you go to addiction, and then you bring in the light and you clear that out, and you fix up, untangle, unravel all those things, list them, speak them out, release them, go fix those relationships. The primary takeaway, my friend, from that must be, it's not about I'm not going to become an alcoholic. It's that why ever let it build up again? Why live at any fear? I'm going to speak out every issue I have with my wife right now. If I make a mistake right now, I'm going to apologize. I'm going to clear it up. I'm going to keep our energy clear, our relationships open. If I mess up as a boss, as an employer, I speak it out straight away. I don't cover it over. That's the primary lesson. Everybody has challenges. Everybody makes mistakes. It's when it builds up till it crushes our consciousness. That's when we lose ourselves in addiction. So the primary lesson. So here's a key thing I want to say. The first three about the present. I have to experience revelation, experience in the present. That opens up from 4 to 8 to 9.
To 9.
4 to 9, the past. Go and unravel it all and heal it all. And then 10 to 12 is moving into the future. Now that you get, and this is everything we teach in Elevation. Now, every day, the second you do something, identify it, acknowledge it. Tshuva, the first step of tshuva is acknowledge it, say it out loud. I did it. Moida ala emes. My name is John Alcoholic. My name is Doniel. I just spoke disrespectfully for my wife. Regret it, feel it, commit to never do again, apologize to that person on the spot. So the primary lesson is I live always connected. And when I step out of connection, I realign myself, I fix it, and I step back into connection, right? 11, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our consciousness, conscious contact with God as we understand him, praying only for knowledge of his will, for has the power to carry that out. This is now the healing state. This is now, I'm no longer defined by my past, but this is the essence of Chassidus. Rabbi Nachman did this, the Baal Shem Tov did this, right? I daven every day, but I meditate every day, right? This is from the Oxford group guy. You have to learn Vekas every day. You have to learn as Buddhist. And I'm no longer defined by my past. Every day I want to say, who am I today? What's my opportunity today? What's my blessing today? What's my mission in the world today? And I'm living forward and I'm living for the now. Because I'm set free of the past and I'm living, right? And meditation, not prayer, dogmatic prayer, transcendent, direct connection to Vekas must be a part of our lives. I believe if we gave that to our children, addiction rates would drop because when they knew divine connection, they knew the place to really run to above rather than run to beyond, right? Beyond the self, the external world. 11, we've done. And finally 12, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we try to carry this message to alcoholics. And what greater way of stepping forward is that I am now beyond myself. The essence of addiction is I see my ego needs as primary and the rest of the world is irrelevant. Isn't that, that's what it is. I'll destroy myself, my family. So the final state of healing in the present is I put others' needs. I'm able to put others' needs before me, not as I'm able to see the other and care for another and take my past to redefine my present and step into a brighter future of contribution. That's what I see. It's a classic.
And there, in terms of connecting that to Chassidus, like the last step in terms of connecting that to Chassidus?
The last step is the classic mitzvah of Chassidus is v'ahavta l'recha kamocha, is to love everyone. The Baal Shem Tov loved the thief and he loved the guy in the gutter and he brought them to his Shabbos table and he said there's a tzaddik in every single one of them and we have to care for others before we care for ourselves. The Avos Yisrael, right? The Jew and the non-Jew. There's stories about the Baal Shem Tov would accept non-Jews and say there's light in all of them and we have to care for all of them. And the essence of Chassidus on the most primary level is to see the tzaddik in every person. and love someone beyond ourselves.
So I want to flesh that out a little bit, because there's the 12 steps. There's certain words, like for example, it says
Eli, that's Chabad, isn't that Chabad's essence in theory in 2020?
To a degree, right? To a degree.
Yeah, okay, we would have to get to Chabad, but surely on a basic level.
No, I mean only in terms of like you're reading it quickly, but as opposed to reading it, hundreds of times and focusing on small nuances. So it says to carry the message to other alcoholics. And there's a line that I highlighted from the big books. The big book says the alcoholic's past thus becomes the principal asset of the family, and frequently it is the only one, right? And he talks about
what does that mean?
He's talking about that in this context, in this chapter, he's talking about the important, like the family in dealing with the addict, and not hiding from the past, but embracing it. There's 12 steps, there's 12 principles, there's also 12 traditions, and there's also 12 promises. And one of the promises is we will not regret the past, right? Someone who goes through the steps will not regret the past nor wish to shut the door on it. What I found, and I feel is almost a primary message of mine, having gone through certain challenges, and certainly not the level of others, right? I don't compare, I don't say sexual abuse is all equal. I was abused by a family friend, someone who's abused by a family member. It's a completely different level. It's a different category. But so I'm not, but there is an aspect of pain is pain, like Viktor Frankl says. Pain is like a gas; it fills up all available space, right? So there is that, but there's no question. There's different levels of experiences that people have, and I'm not putting myself in their shoes. However, for my own experience, I found that it's so important to look at my experiences as godly. Like I have to go back there and say, like, every single one of these was so important. So one of the reasons I did a talk on porn addiction was because for a long time, I reconciled with the fact that I was an addict. I couldn't reconcile with the fact that I was a porn addict. I joke sometimes that I had the best and the worst of addictions. I had the work addiction and I had the porn addiction, right? They're the ones that are most celebrated and kind of like most looked down upon, a sex addiction.
Right.
And the truth of the matter. So what did I do? I said, how do I incorporate this as another experience that's meaningful to me? Is if I speak about it, or another way of doing it, I did it on that level, but another way is also helping someone specifically with a porn addiction, because then it takes all of my experiences. It says the greatest doctors, the greatest rabbis, the greatest whoever, healers, can't do for someone what someone who experienced that same thing can do for them.
1,000%.
Those experiences all of a sudden become godly. So I think the 12 step, and I don't know if this exists, that's what I want to flesh out a little bit, is it's not just saying it's not just saying to do service to others. It's very specifically says to find other alcoholics and to help them.
We're going through that.
It should mean to find other gambling addicts for a gambler, to find other sex addicts.
I think that's a double budget. First of all, we know that the classic line of Chassidus, the classic essence of Chassidus, and based on the Kid Ve'ari, is Yoseh ha'or haba min ha'choshech and amalach ha'la'aretz kavoidai. That all of the Aretz, all of the Artzis, the Aretz is the lowest physical place, that is full of divine revelation. Rabbi Nachman talks about finding the Nakuda Tava, the good point in every trauma, in every challenge of life, to find the good in it. Yoseh ha'or haba min ha'choshech, the greatest light is that light which is born in the darkness. Right? What does it mean? Shema Yisrael Shem Elokeinu Shem Echad. We know if we're meditating together on a hilltop somewhere soon by us, Ellie, and we're having a divine, amazing experience, right? We know, wow, there is Hashem. I'm surrounded by Hashem's light. But when we say Shema Yisrael Shem Elokeinu Shem Echad, we say Hashem is equally revealed in the light as he is in the darkness. And the truth is, without going into the Kabbalah, there's a greater revelation in the darkness than there's even in the light. And that's why I said that the present it begins with, and then we go past and future. Hashem Melech, Hashem Malach, Hashem Yimlech Lo'olam Ve'ed. When I can see Hashem and I get the clarity to awaken in the present to see the truth, it's then I can go back and see that in the darkest place, I was being guided, I was being taught. Why did I have to go through that trauma? That's why I don't like this genetic predisposition garbage. I'm not saying it's not there, but it's not you're a victim because of your genes. From Torah's perspective, Hashem gave you your genes because he wanted you to crash, because he needed you to know that you have so much light that you can shine bright, you can overcome that darkness, you can become that, the hardwired neural networks, you become the disease of the brain, and you can be bigger than it and overcome it and transform it. So that revelation is the purpose of reality. Hashem wants to do it with Tachtonim. Hashem wants him light revealed in the lowest possible place. So we say Hashem Malach. Now that I see him now, then I go back to the hardest part and say, wow, even there you were. And that's the revelation that informs my future, my capacity to help others. And it's obvious that if you have the capacity to face that flavor, that frequency of challenge, then it's obviously that you have the greatest gift. You have the power of Kiddush Hashem, that you can really reveal light even in that darkness. So you have to meet people on that level. You have to meet people in that struggle. And more than what you say to them, and more than having the right words, and more than having the techniques, you are a living embodiment that light made it even to there. And I believe your presence alone, having gone through that, gives them the strength and the knowledge on a soul level to turn that situation around the same as you have. And that creates a critical mass. That's when you stand up on stage, you were eloquent, you practiced, it was beautiful what you said. But there's the second you stand up on stage and say, just the beginning, your presence, there's a light that addicts have. There's a light that people that have gone through trauma and sexual abuse have when they confront it and turn around, which opens up energetically, psychically, spiritually, the possibility for others to do that the same.
Do the same thing, right? Removing that shame, which is a big part of it. I can tell you from my own, and that's all I have is my own experience, is that the genetic, maybe we can say genetic predisposition to use that word, but that's the most I would give it, because I've interacted with hundreds of addicts and spoken to them in detail about their story. And I still have yet to hear a story that doesn't have pain. Sometimes it takes a little while to get there. I had a relatively normal childhood. Everything was okay. And anything out of the ordinary, when I was 3 years old, my brother drowned in the bathtub with me, and I was blamed for the rest of my life for killing him. Like some
I 100% with you.
That are
but what I say is, for me, it's not like, the person has no control because they have genetic predisposition or they have disease. Whatever you want to call it, Hashem set you up because he believes in you enough that he's going to drop you and you're going to find yourself and pull yourself out. And that's the gift. However Hashem sets it up, however he sets up the narrative, the script, the body, the soul, I just happened to meet that person. He believed that you could go there and pull yourself out. And the Gemara says you chose that. Your soul chose that because it wanted to reveal that light. I've worked in past life regression for many years. I've taken people that have gone through crazy trauma, including sexual abuse. And when you take them to their past life, it's unbelievable to find out what they set up in one life to lead them to the next. So the fact that, according to science, I don't believe there's a genetic predisposition to fall or to collapse into that sexuality, that perversion, or to become an addict, fine. Hashem set it up because he believes in you. And I believe when you say that, I believe when you say it's not because of genetic predisposition, I believe when you say whatever it is, Hashem sent me up, then you believe that if he could put you there, he could also get you out. And that's the biggest gift to say, because that is part of Amunah. Hashem got me in here. If you believe you can break it, believe that you can rebuild it. If you believe Hashem could put you here, then Hashem can also get you out of here. And
do you have a few more minutes? I don't want to put any pressure on anyone else who needs to leave. But
yeah, I'm wondering about boring everybody. Is anyone still around right now?
Everyone's welcome to leave. No one's going to look at anyone funny. It's a webinar call. So if we get down, if we get down to there's no one left, we can check out.
Painting pictures. Can I just ask the audience right now? We asked to do this in the elevation program. We have an online program. Can everyone just give us a one-line emotional check-in? How are you dealing with this conversation right now?
One line.
If you're watching this on Facebook, write one line and hit the love button or like button so more people see this. Write one line in this. What's this like for you? Amazing, love it, overwhelmed, amazing, beautiful, awesome, fabulous, love it, something, I can't read this too fast, amazing, great, moving, eye-opening, awesome. Okay, people aren't completely bored. Fine.
So here's what I want to touch on, because right now we've focused very much on the addict. But I suspect that there are a lot of people, and judging by some of the questions I saw, and it's hard to read the chat and the questions all at the same time and stay engaged. So if I miss someone specifically, but there seemed to be a theme of questions that I saw, which is dealing with the family, if they have a family member or a loved one who's an addict, and how to, I have to recuse myself on that side, but I wish I invited another panelist. But if there's something, some message to those, I mean, I imagine some of what you shared at the end about viewing all of our experiences as God-given, right, then that too is another challenge. But I think that's a theme of questions that I've seen, and we definitely want to talk to that audience because it's not all addicts on the line.
First of all, I have no idea to answer that question. Second of all, 3 answers came to me as you spoke. So I'm going to tell you what they are that came to me. Number 1, they must embody unbelievable, radical, unconditional love. And they have to know that there's a divine good soul in there, which is just as tormented as they are. And they have to hold space for unbelievable love, number 1. At the same time, they also have to have boundaries. There are limits, and you can't watch your life smashed to pieces, and you can't watch other people's lives smashed to pieces and just say, I'm giving love. There are times you actually need boundaries. There's times you need to protect yourself as a family member. And that's also good. That's also good for the person to know that there's limits. And there are many people that say, I'm so spiritual, I'm going to have unconditional love for this to talk to a person in the house, and they get emotionally smashed to pieces and they become traumatized as well. So there is a paradox, and some paradoxes are paradoxes, but they're still true, that you can have unbelievable love for this addict, and you have to embody. They need to know that they are not rejected, they are not despised. They need to know that someone believes in them until they can learn to believe in themselves. Fine. At the same time, there has to be boundaries, there has to be borders, and there has to be limitations. And that's not a contradiction, and they can happen simultaneously. And the last thing I want to say, and each of these I could speak a long time about, the last thing that came to me to say is, this is powerful and true. They need to know that they have been chosen as well.
Who needs to know?
The family member there to support the addict. That in the same way, we believe that the addict has been chosen to confront their shadow, their darkness, the memtes sharituma, the ultimate darkness, in order to reveal the light at that bottom. The family member needs to know that they're also devastated, and they're also furious, and they're also overwhelmed, that they have been chosen to confront, they have been chosen to support. They are also into the darkness, rather than saying, why me? And this drunk or this addict is on the hero's journey, they're going to turn around, but now I just have to sit there and hold on. It is obviously their lesson to learn simultaneous unconditional love. And it is their lesson to learn boundaries. And they have been chosen by Hashem to hold space on this journey. And that is their 12-step breakthrough, right? Because it's going to bring up their junk. They're going to feel abandoned. They're going to feel overwhelmed. They're going to feel frustrated and bitter. They're going to develop their resentfulness, which for sure can trigger their own addictions, their own challenges. So they have to realize that they have been chosen by Hashem for the path of Emunah, for the path of unbelievable challenge, to support someone going through this. And then for unbelievable, they are a force of unbelievable love. And love needs boundaries, and love needs connection. And Hashem wants to teach them. And if they believe that this is a divine gift meant for them, that they are chosen, then they also have their 12-step process. They also have to accept Hashem into this situation, to trust that Hashem can do it. And I always say to people like coronavirus as well, stop saying, it's a hard time. What is it bringing up for you? Right? Some people dealing with an addict will bring up that they're out of control, right? I mean, the person feels I can't control the addict family. Some people will feel abandoned and alone. I married my husband. He was supposed to protect me. He's not protecting me. No one's protecting me. My father never protected me. Like, they collapse at that. Start and say.
You're saying, like with coronavirus, like don't be general. Don't be general. Like, it's hard. Like, what is specifically hard?
Take the light all the way down. The tikkun comes. What number it was when you break down. What is the things that you are dealing with?
The searching and fearless moral inventory.
Right. You do your own fearless moral inventory. It's people come to me and say, my husband's an addict. It's really overwhelming. I go, what? It's really overwhelming. I always go, is it? How? How is it overwhelming for you? You can't imagine what it's like. I can imagine what it would bring up for me, right? I always feel like a failure. Finally, I've got a marriage. I'm going to be success, and now I'm a failure again. Somebody's about failure. Somebody's about abandonment. Somebody's about shame. I'm embarrassed to be around someone like that. You have to know what it works on for you, and you have to release that for you.
It sounds like you're challenging the family of the addict to do the same thing that the 12 steps wants to do.
Them is challenging. They have to maybe their meditation.
But that personal responsibility is what is the personal.
That's what it is, isn't it? That's all we have in life. That's all we have in life.
I can tell you, as you were speaking, that what came up for me was my wife, who when I was getting sober, she was not my wife then, but so maybe a little bit different for some with wife and children and everything else. But what she did provide for me was the unconditional love. In a lot of ways, I tell her when I'm feeling sappy and emotional that she loved me back to life. So she did see me in a way that I didn't see myself, which allowed me to get there. But she was also very clear that she had standards.
Amazing.
And that she was there and she loves me and she wants to be with me and she still believes in me. But I had to also, in order to see her love from a close place. And I say everyone deserves love, just some from a different distance.
Gives you the healing of the boundaries. Boundaries keep you in line, but love lets you rise up. Right. What you need. It's good for them and it's good for you.
Yeah, a word of caution is one thing that doesn't work ever is controlling it, is trying to manage it. Like smashing all the alcohol in a house or stuff like that.
That's like, go back to the first rule, right? The first step is it's not in your control. That they have to have that faith step as well.
Right. It's the same thing. Is letting go of the control has to happen on both sides.
All of those 12 steps are the 12 steps of Emunah. They're 12 steps of integrating Emunah. The Siva Shalom says there's 3 levels of Emunah. Emunah of the mind, Emunah of the heart, Emunah of the body. And you connect to the mind, to the divine connection. You bring that down to heal your emotions, and then you act in a way that expresses that revelation. That's what I see in the 12 steps. And everyone has to work on that. The wife of the addict has to realize it's out of their control and turn to Hashem and see what fears, emotions, right? And then live a life of revelation and blessing once they can step beyond that.
Right. One of the questions that came up is the big book describes an alcoholic as someone who, when they keep away from drink, they act much like many men. And the big book does talk about other kinds of issues. And someone asked about OCD and other kind of mental disorders with addiction, and kind of each one, in my own experience, each one has to be separated. 12 steps doesn't deal that well with trauma. And I had to go specifically to trauma therapy to deal with that. So 12 step is not a panacea. It's not a cure-all for everything. So if someone's dealing with OCD or dealing with other stuff that make that more complicated, then each one has to be dealt with professionals in that regard. But in general, it describes an alcoholic as someone who acts relatively normal until drink is introduced to their system. So is
that true based on what you've said previously?
Is it true what?
I mean, you've said, and I've said that this person is psychologically destabilized, and the venting of that is the addiction. So are they truly normal? How are we defining a normal in that sense?
There is the trauma, and there is the stuff that works. But what it means is that, for example, the lies may be confined to a very specific area. There may not be denial in all areas of their life. They may be a functioning alcoholic running a functioning business, and functional in many areas, and awareness and the ability to tell the truth about themselves. But this one area becomes like a dark hole. Like there's,
right.
I've described it, many other addicts describe it as a double life, right? There's the areas where I'm like, I can see clearly, and then there's this massive blind spot when it comes to this issue.
So I would say parenthetically, I would say that retroactively, it's not true. Even when they thought they were strong, they weren't as strong as they thought. That's what I'd say the punchline of that journey is. Ellie, you're a successful guy. Suddenly you have an addiction to porn. You overcome that. So I would say even in the success, if we plugged into you before it all started, there was always challenges. If you listen, I have a lot of people that come to very successful, everything except for this one thing. And the more why are they having issues with their husband? Why are they having issues with their wife? Why are they having anxiety about work? You start to see what's in there. I think the illusion is we tell ourselves we're fine besides one thing. But the truth is, if we double clicked on that, there's all kind of challenges there.
That is 100% true. I'm not taking away from that. I'm focusing on a different aspect. So the book calls it like the disease of the mind and the disease of the body, right? There's the mind that tells us, oh, maybe I can try to drink wine instead of drinking hard alcohol, or maybe if I get a friend to keep my stash and I go over once a week to get one bottle at a time, or any which way we figure out how to control this. That's a disease of the mind, right? They can just play tricks on us and we can end up in being pulled to something. And then there's disease of the body, which is as soon as the alcohol is introduced to the system, there's a chapter in the big book called The Doctor's Opinion, which is not written by Bill W. It's written by a doctor. And a lot of it is quoted from a doctor. And one of the things the doctor says is comparing the response of an addict to an allergic reaction to the drug, an allergic reaction to. So I was wondering what you thought of that from a Kabbalah perspective, this idea. We touched on it a little bit, but I want to flesh it out some. We touched on it a little bit in our private conversation.
I'm not sure the question. You're saying, is the addiction a form of?
So it talks about the mind and body, right? So the mind disease is that it thinks things, it rationalizes, and we need to check ourselves with someone else. The body disease is that when it gets introduced into our body, then all of a sudden, all hell breaks loose, right? Like that first drink just opens up Pandora's box.
Yeah, what's the question?
So in the doctor's opinion, it compares it to an allergic reaction. And says when alcohol is introduced into an alcoholic's body, they can be spiritually fit, they can be sober for a long period of time, but something happens, almost like literally an allergic reaction is the way it describes it, that alcohol is introduced to the system and everything goes out.
You're talking about after the addiction, after the person's
afterwards.
Well,
Yes.
So why are they falling off the wagon is what we're saying.
Yeah, what's happening from that first drink? Is there any Kabbalistic or anything you've come across that talks about this body disease, this body dysfunction of being introduced to the drug for the first time?
I don't have to go to Kabbalah yet. I'm not quite understanding the question now. I just want to clarify it. On a basic body level, a person can work through the blocks, work through the issues, etc. And I believe they'd be infinitely stronger and much more resilient to challenge on a body level. There is a thing called body memory. There is a thing where the body has, I don't know if you call it allergic reaction, but it has a conditioned response, Pavlov's dog, right? And the body has a conditioned response to that. You did mention that. You mentioned that you saw something once, and what was the word? You became overwhelmed, or a kind of adrenaline rush.
I felt like a buzz, like just a rush. I couldn't.
There's a buzz. So the body remembers, right? When we see someone that we loved a long time ago, our body gets adrenaline in it, okay? If we see a picture of our favorite movie, Back to the Future from the 1980s, which I flashed up on my screen the other day. I suddenly remember going to the cinema with my mother and just loving that movie and, seeing Superman and feeling I can fly. So our body and our emotions are associative. That's what's called Doniel, where we see one thing and we imagine another. So I don't have to go to the depth of Kabbalah to understand that mechanism. What Kabbalah can say is that's exactly what the Siva Shalom talks about, Emunas Ha'avarim. The first level of Muna is understanding and experiencing a higher consciousness of Hashem. But when Rabbi Yeshab discusses, as many Sigati can do, in Kabbalah as well, it's called Gadlus Rishon, Gadlus Sheni, Katnus Rishon, Katnus Sheni, is that I can experience the revelation, but my heart has not been rewired to that truth. There are many people that can go to a Buddhist meditation retreat and blow out of their body, a Torah meditation retreat, and blow out of their body, have a spiritual experience, and come back and still be rude and arrogant and whatever, right? Because the experience stopped here, right? They had the awareness, but the heart is still programmed in the same egotistic way. So that's the first 3 steps of what you said of the 12 steps. The second is you need to bring that light all the way down into your heart, to transform your emotions, to align your emotions with the higher spiritual truth. That's what's called tikkun hamidus. Tikkun means to fix, to heal, to realign our hearts until what I feel in my heart is an expression of what's in my soul. But the definition of emunas ha'avarim, that the moon is not in the body, the Baal Shem Tov would say that all physical sickness comes, he says explicitly, because the body is not connected to the divinity of the soul. There's a disconnect. The word choleh, chol, means chol as in that which is disconnected from holiness. It's amazing, right? So that's what SE is. If you ever looked in somatic experiencing, the modality is you're realizing that when you're afraid of something, there's a movement and a shift and a lock in the body. And you have to gently go through that and massage and open it and cause its release. And the Siva Shalom talks about that the great spiritual masters in Judaism are called tzaddik, right? The word tzaddik literally means tzedek, which means aligned. They're aligned from their soul to their minds, to the heart, to the body. All levels are united.
Was he saying that concept, when there's something off, right? There can be a mind disease, a body disease, a spiritual disease. Like all of those are kind of out of alignment,
and then out of alignment. So the tikkun comes, Eli, from the top down. You can access your soul. You use that change, or you have to change your beliefs first, right? When you change beliefs, then you work willing. That the first three steps change your beliefs. There is a God, experience it. Now you have to go through your heart. You have to bring that light. If there is a God, then I have to take responsibility. I have to take ownership. I have to apologize to people, right? You bring that down to the heart. What I'm saying to you on a very simple level is, the last level to change. A change of mind can happen in a second. Oh my gosh, I never realized that. Fine. A change of heart takes time. You really have to sit on it, right? So the higher you go up, the more you go outside space and time. And the lower you come down, the body is very bound by time. Unhealthy emotions create illness, but you can heal your emotions and still have the illness because the body now has to go through a whole purification process. So my guess is he can call it allergies and call it what he wants. The body still carries tumor. The body still carries the toxic effect of the destructive beliefs, of the destructive emotions. And the work that I do and others do, I believe that if you get a person to the deeper states and you transform their beliefs and you transform their heart, then the final level is to bring the light. And this is discussed, to bring the Kedusha down to Maha, it's called a Zikuch HaNefesh, to bring that down to a physical level. That's what energy healers do. Energy healers of thousands of years in Kabbalah and Tanakh, Elisha, they used to put their hands on people and bring the chiyas and the das and the consciousness into the body to release it. I believe, from our tradition, from what I've learned, that could be done with you as well. That even if you saw it, God forbid, but you saw it, you could release that tension, that excitement, that lust that is now on a cellular level within you. It's the final level of bringing the light above within you. It's going into the physical level. And that's what it means that tzaddikim did not deteriorate in their grave. You know, that's what it means that Moshe, even in his skin, had light coming out, because the illumination of the soul was now fully embodied in the physicality. But that's the last level that needs the shift. And I believe it's possible. Many people say, hey, look, I'm going fine. I don't have to worry about that. I'm way behind that. But you could take the holiness all the way down.
I might be saying the same thing, because when you talk about possibility, you're saying that that's a state that people could achieve. But, you know, when you're describing Moshe Rabbeinu as the example, obviously most people aren't going to get there. So to have a practical system that
could address... So the Baal Shem Tov says, when Mashiach comes, we will all go there. We will all have our Das Elyon, our ketters, tzaddikim, yoshvim, ba'atrosehem, b'voshehem, that the consciousness will be embodied all the way down to the physical. And individuals are able to achieve that. And I believe the meditational techniques of the Baal Shem Tov is supposed to reopen the generation to that. And on the most basic level, Ellie, I think many people would be happy that they're no longer addicts and I'm not emotionally connected to it. They've worked through taking responsibility and they see a small physical response. And I believe there are tools that exist that you could release it even on that physical level. You could rewire the body level. You could reprogram its associations. So it doesn't have to release that adrenaline hit, you know, whether it's a serotonin rush or whatever it is coming in there at that moment. And that's just taking it the next level all the way down.
Got it. So someone asked a question, which I'll address, is they're struggling with porn and masturbation, and where do they get started as a way to address that? So where do I start? I'm addicted to masturbating and porn, and I was molested for a long time. This was a question.
First of all, I'm sorry to hear. Sorry to hear. Ellie, you're welcome to make professional recommendations. I know David Chaim, who, he gave a shout out that you could spread whatever they're doing and that kind of stuff. I would add to whatever Ellie's about to say about whatever best 12-step programs are helpful. I would add that learning deep Jewish meditation on top of that support, I believe will deeply amplify the inner work and empower you to take, steps, as long as you also have the rest of the infrastructure the 12-step program would support you with. I'm not experienced enough to say, do this program over here and you'll have 20% better. This is not a field I professionally deal with, but I have a lot of people, thousands of people that come to our online program, our retreats, and I know that these tools work very powerfully. And if you're dealing with addiction, which means you need constant guidance on an everyday level, then I think, Ellie, whatever Ellie will recommend you to, plus these kind of techniques, I think would be the magic pill to take your life to the next level.
Yeah, I think they'll match ultimately, but I'll read a quote from the big book. It says, if you have decided you want what we have and are willing to go to any length to get it, then you're ready to take certain steps. So, and I think that's the key, is that, and when it talks about steps, it says you're ready to take certain steps. I don't think it's only talking about the 12 steps. I think there's that willingness to do whatever it takes to get sober. And I remember that day that things turned around for me, where it kind of like shattered me inside. And I'd called someone I'd met who was in program, and I said, just tell me what to do. And I think I said these words, or I thought these words. He could have told me anything at that moment, and I would have been willing. And to be in that space of making it literally priority number one. So I had someone who I was sponsoring once, and he told me, he calls me up and he says, I acted out last night, right? He watched pornography or whatever else. So I said, why didn't you call me? Like, that's what we had discussed. He said it was 3 a.m. I said, so who said? I said, did I say not to call 3 a.m? So he said, I don't want to inconvenience you at 3 a.m. I said, okay, so if your priority is more that you don't want to inconvenience me more than not watching pornography, then that will be your priority. And I'm sure you'll have 100 things that you can put in front of that also. But you could ask me, you could text me, you could have called me, and like, what would have been the worst thing? I said, don't wake me up again, but I had never instructed you otherwise. In fact, I said, you can call anytime. He said, yeah, I thought anytime. I didn't know 3 a.m. But to me, that was indicative of, not that I would have done anything necessarily, but I feel I probably wouldn't have heard the phone, but most likely taking that step would have helped him a lot. I think it's that the only advice I can give to someone is to make it priority number one. If you want to stop something, if it's powerful and you've tried a lot of different things to stop, is make it priority number one. Reach out to people who have had this and recognize I've had to do things that other people haven't had to do. Other people have had to do things that are more than me. I never went to rehab. There are other people who signed up 30, 60, 90, 6 months of rehab in order to kick an addiction. I was very close a couple of times to checking myself into rehab, but I never had to go there. But if I needed to go there, I like to believe that I would have been willing to. And if I didn't have that level of willingness, then the rest wouldn't have followed. So before any action comes that willingness.
I just want to add, what you just said is textbook Kabbalah, and it's put down a lot. This is discussed in the Zohar, and it's discussed by Rabbi Nachman, right? The reason you are taken to the bottom, the reason you are given any block of resistance, Rabbi Nachman screams this 1,000 times, is to awaken your will to fight. And, we all say, yeah, I'll work on it one day. I do something if someone would show me how to do it, etc. But when you hit that place, the line is, Ein davar oimed lifnei ratzon. Nothing will stand before your will, right? You said, that's it, I'm done. And Hashem pushed you and pinned you down on the mat to awaken the part of you that was willing, despite the darkness. I want to fight. I don't care who and what, I want it. And Hashem was like, I've been taking you down further and further to get you to the point where you say, I want it. When Bill, what's his name? Bill W., when he had his first breakthrough, when he had his spiritual experience, there's 2 lines he said, these famous 2 lines? One, he said, if there's a God, will he show himself? And the other line he said in that moment is exactly what you just said. Now I'm ready to do anything, right? And that's when it lit him up, right? So Rabbi Nachman says, the point of all the manias, of all the blocks, are only to awaken your will. And when your will gets strong, then that force, it's called Malaman, goes up to the spiritual world and generates supernatural opportunity that opens for you. Suddenly you meet the person, you meet the healer, you meet that breakthrough, suddenly you have clarity, the person drops the number into your lap, then it all comes. But Hashem needed you to get to the point when you were going to fight and do it. And he says, from that I can build a new world for you. So it's exactly the point. Everything is there, every challenge is there to awaken the will.
Beautiful. So maybe just to make this as practical as possible, if you have a couple minutes, maybe lead us in a meditation that can...
I'm going to duck out of that. Can I duck out of that? It's a beautiful thing to say.
Yeah.
I will say the following thing. There's people asking, do we do what Don Jews? Elevation Project. You can check out Elevation Mastery online. It's an online program, hundreds of people, Jews, non-Jews. You believe in God. You don't have to believe in God. The God of your choosing, whatever God you understand, right? Everybody is welcome. And I'm just like, somebody asked about that. Yes, I believe that we have a gift within Torah for the whole of the world. And it's part of our mission is to get it out there to every human being that's seeking in the deepest way. That's number one. I don't want to do meditation now because it takes more than 2 minutes to be authentic with it. But I don't mind even for this group to come back together and do a meditation. If people want on Facebook, say yes, or in this group, you can let us know, send an email. I don't mind being there and giving people an experience of it. I think it's a beautiful, incredible thing in our tradition that people don't know about. And there's lots of yeses coming in, so we can make the time to do that. in the right time, probably with Ryan's help as well. So
maybe we'll do that. So
take a rain check on that.
To do something that's won't be as much discussion and just a meditation led by you on specifically around these.
You can check on YouTube. There's tons of free videos, samples of the meditations. I'm would love to do something with the group here.
Yeah,
for sure.
There's something powerful. I don't know what it is, but you watch something, it's happening live. It's a lot easier to watch and engage and watch a recording that happened even yesterday.
The energy is electric when you're together. That's part of the meditation technique. Is kashrus. You all connect at once, doing it together, and it brings an extra power for sure. I think that's part of this sort of the group of the 12 steps. When you're there with others, the consciousness forms and binds together. We should say thank you. I want to thank you, Chaved, for bringing us together. I hope, was that interesting for people? I hope so, and I hope Chaved gets nachas.
Actually, I want to give one thing specific. Actually, on the last question is for people who are struggling with porn or masturbation, check out Guard Your Eyes and the work they do. They have some free support groups and information, and they make distinctions between people who are not addicted but struggling with pornography, addicted to pornography but not addicted to other sexual behaviors, and then addicted to all sexual behaviors.
Is that guardyoureyes.com?
Guardyoureyes.com. It's an amazing organization that offers a lot of support specifically in this area, and just something practical as a first step, but knowing that there are no magic bullets. There's that willingness to do whatever it takes to get healed and make that priority number one. So I don't want to forget that, but going back to thank you, Chaved, I'm good with that.
We thanked Chaved and Ryan, whatever help. And I thank you. I mean, you've gone through such darkness and you really owned it, and you're really shining to a lot of people. And it may be a blessing for you and for your family for deep healing.
Thank you so much.
You're living the best of it, right? You're sharing it forward, and you're at the place where I'm sure times in your life where you felt you could never get out of it or whatever it was. And now you're a place where goodness. I get that you're still an addict. I get you're still doing it. But you're really making a beautiful contribution, and you should see tremendous light and blessing in your life from the light and blessing you can bring to others, the healing you bring to others.
Thank you. I've been using the same journaling app for the last 7+ years. So sometimes when I'm struggling a little bit, I go back to my early journals and I'm like, okay, I can see a little bit of the progress.
Beautiful. Awesome.
So thank you.
My friend. Okay. Thank you, everybody.
All right. Thank you, everyone. The app for journaling is my W Days, my wonderful days. It's like $1.
Get a sponsorship from them. Good evening, good morning. Hashem should be with you all and bless you all for healing and light.
Have a great day. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining.